Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Fanfiction podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. Today, we're diving into a brand new story, True Terror in the World of Heroism Part 12 by HYPN0S. Before we jump in, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. Chapter Summary: Dancing Mad, Part 2, the continuation of the USJ assault and the initial aftermath of the mess. Chapter Notes: I live. Goddamn it all to hell. I can't believe it took me this long to write this. This was supposed to be out in December of last year. But honestly speaking, I was rather exhausted of many things, to the point that I was writing small lines of the chapter and correcting whenever I saw something wrong, to the point that this might be my smallest chapter as of yet. Also games, Destiny Lightfall came out and I am actually having fun. Despite the rushed campaign, Stand is fucking fun while playing as a warlock. I do the most Titan thing a warlock can do, which is grappling myself to my opponent and smash their face in. Also Fortnite. I cannot believe those mad lads somehow got the Doomslayer, Gerald of Rivia and Deku in the same roster. This is the one game where Deku using a burst assault rifle kills a quantum, sentient banana while in midair and preparing a smash attack, while Chun-Li is flying on the map thanks to balloons and sniping anyone in sight. So yeah, that also took time of writing. I fell into Fortnite, which is not bad. To be honest, weird that this game once was another thing altogether. So with that out of the way, let's go to the chapter. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter 7, Dancing Mad, Part 2, 5 minutes before, Flood Zone. Tsuyu, in a rage-induced swinging and flesh-tearing spree, came to the realization that Izuku would start calling her Tsuyu-chan because villains attacked the USJ. The sheer smugness she was feeling was drowned, of course, by the sheer outrage and anger she was feeling now. She could fairly say she was angrier than Bakugo, a feat in its own right, but she is part animal. Animals don't fight fair and do so angry. Right now, this was her, and it would explain why her clawed fingers are currently in the gills of a villain that was part piranha and screaming as she dragged the bones in her fingertips and tore flesh apart, and caused agonizing pain. With a flex of her legs, she jumped away from the pained villain as she swam onto another villain. This time her tongue lashed out of her mouth, instantly impacting exposed flesh and injecting a cocktail of neurotoxins that were diluted by the water, but that was the point: cause pain, not death. However, she was sorely tempted to inject them with the real deal, a cocktail of the deadliest neurotoxins she had available. They were attacking them with the sole intent of killing them. Why should she hold anything back? Of course, that was the animal in her, something every single quirk user with animal-based quirks had to deal with: their instincts. Animal instincts mixed with human logic and rationality. Honestly, she doesn't know how Mako does it, lose herself into the animal rage, because even if she's part rabbit, rage is rage, everyone feels it, even the cuddly rabbit. A small sensation in her lungs made her realize she needed to come to the surface for a mouthful of air. With a pulse of her powerful legs, Tsuyu left behind a scene of carnage and pain, several villains bleeding profusely and slowly buoying into the surface while Tsuyu swam towards the surface at her own volition. Finally reaching the surface, Tsuyu took a deep breath, eyes under her goggles scanning the surface and finding, to her annoyance, more villains swimming by, trying to bring Bakugo down. Taking another scoopful of air, she began to swim onward, like a torpedo with just one objective in mind. Slowly diving, the sound began to drown into a dull thump whenever Bakugo let out an explosion that broke the surface of the water and made the villains nearby recoil and dive deeper to avoid the attacks. These were her target prey. Her tongue lashed out and rapped on the first one, a weakened villain that was surely not even past 18 years, weakened, beaten, frightened. He was perfect prey, one that let out a scream underwater and began to flay his arms about, disturbing the water around him, trying to escape Tsuyu, but no one would escape her. She was done being nice to people that attacked her classmates, her friends. With a single flex of her tongue, she dragged the villain to her, once in striking distance. Her fingers pierced his shoulders and she dug deep, reaching bone in the joints, dislocating the limb with ease and tearing ligaments and muscles as she pulled out her bloody fingers, while she could see how the villain screamed in pain underwater, filling his lungs with water as he flailed in pain. She found herself not caring about their pain. They were trying to kill her friends, her classmates. They attacked first and drew first blood. It wasn't her fault if she wanted to pay them the offense with compound interest. Her legs were at the face of the villain she just crippled. Then she flexed, used his face as a springboard, and propelled herself upwards while her victim had a broken face. She aimed herself at another villain that didn't even notice her. She propelled herself even more with each pump of her legs, of her body, aiming herself at the villain's center of gravity. Bam! The surface of the water exploded with the form of another villain being shoulder-tackled by Tsuyu, who wrapped her tongue around his waist while in midair and then without any remorse swung him around until at the apex of her swing released him into the unforgiving water. Face first. At that speed, it was like hitting the pavement. Tsuyu didn't even dignify a feeling of pity as she simply rose a hand and then was yanked away by a flying Bakugu midday. So all that. Precious. Bakugu laughed as his feet propelled them away. Looking down, Tsuyu saw several spots of blood forming on the once tranquil waters, several villains going to the shores in several states of pain and leaving a trace of diluted blood from their wounds. From what she could see, barely 3 were unscathed from her, Bakugu's or AMR's attack BAMM. Both teens' attention was brought to the once reinforced blast doors leading to the entrance of the USJ, and their eyes widened. Holy shit, both teens swore at the same time. Even at a distance, they could see him, All Might in all his muscular, imposing glory. He wasn't smiling. As Bakugu began to blast themselves away to the boat to get AMR, so said boy was on the verge of a mental breakdown after seeing what he had seen. He had seen what they didn't, how the blast door simply crumbled as if had been made of paper and a gigantic hand had crumbled it and tossed it away off the hinges without any effort. He didn't need to have supervision to see how pissed All Might was the moment he entered, because he simply exuded anger at the moment. For a fleeting moment, he thought All Might had found out and was here to get him. Hey, Frenchie. Bakugu's yelling made him blink and return to the real world. We gotta jet off this shit. It's sinking. Yeah, AMR breathed as he got ready to use his quirk and jump away. The fuck happened to him? He wasn't that shaken when we got kidnapped by the troop. Probably the fact this isn't the troop. Bakugu-chan. AMR heard enough. He just blasted himself away. They are getting suspicious, he thought to himself with nervousness. Calm yourself. You're going to out yourself, hurt your parents and the other and dash. The lights of the USJ began to flicker, which didn't herald anything good. He was right when 3 containers appeared out of thin air in a crackle of electricity and landed in several parts of the USJ. There was a beat of silence. Then he heard them. The distinctive sound of liquors hissing. Oh, come on, downpour zone. Tokoyami hated the rain. Despite giving him the aesthetic and the mood for some revelry, he never agreed on how the water clung onto the feathers on his head. It was oddly uncomfortable, to be sure. HGHHH. The scream of a nearby villain that flew away made him focus on the fight around him. Eyes narrowed, his eyes traveled around the villains gathered to attack him, each one sporting wound and bleeding from several cuts from landing on the unforgiving ground and tearing skin. You little brat. I am going to tear your feathers and stuff them on your ass. One of the villains screamed in anger, spit flying from his mouth and washed away by the downpour. Really? A dual-tone voice sounded all over the darkened urban zone that resembled a disaster zone, making the villains flinch. It was motherly. It had an edge. Because last I remember, the voice grew in tone as the shadows that dotted the darkened zone shifted, like ink. The last person who said those exact words is currently trying to put his feet back into their sockets. Tokoyami had to wince at that as a figure emerged from the combined shadows behind the gathered villains. Humanoid in form, with what seemed a cloak of pure darkness covering her body. Her head was the most noticeable. The skull of a crow covered the head like a helmet and shadowed the eyes. The visible part of the face was obviously feminine by the pale skin coloration and delicate lips painted in black and crooked into a mocking smile, yellow glowing eyes lighting the sockets of the crow skull. Finally, long inky hair pooled out of the head and into the ground, almost seeming to stretch into the shadows, the clothes, and everything she owned. Now the figure said, eagerness easily distinguishable in her voice. Like with your friend, I get to play with you all. The shadows seemed to come alive as tentacles manifested out of every single darkened crevice, even the villain's own shadows, instantly making them suffer mental meltdowns. Ua. Dark shadow, Tokoyami said with a shake of his head as his nails sharpened, some fondness on his voice at the actions of his quirker friend. What a mad banquet of darkness you bring for us to feast. Name, Fumikage Tokoyami. Original quirk, Dark Shadow. Mutated quirk, Lady Shadow. A Dark Shadow. Ascension emitter quirk. Dark Shadow was a beast of shadows held within Fumicage's own body and who he could summon and desummon at will, possessing a variety of offensive and defensive options that helped Tokoyami greatly. When the gas hit, Fumicage's quirk changed greatly, no longer a being created of shadows tied to his body, but to his shadows. Now a humanoid form, Lady Shadow as stated in the registry, but referred still as Dark Shadow by Fumicage, can do what she could originally do, but far, far worse, to everyone that's a target. Dark Shadow can manifest from any shadow from a 100-meter range of fumigage and see from them. As long he is present and shadows are around, Dark Shadow can manifest in them, can manifest her limbs or multiple copies of them. Of course, this happens when there is light around them. This is her range on a normal day. At night or in darkness, her range increases to 500 meters, and unlike its previous form, it doesn't lose control or try to exert control over fumigage, although fumigage has to be careful with his own negative feelings, as these do affect Dark Shadow regardless of the day and night cycle. One particular weakness she has is that if she is in a room, she can only manifest in the shadows inside that room, unless a shadow somehow connects to the outside, both limiting and enhancing abilities in enclosed spaces. Another thing, she acts as an annoying older sister with a bone to pick with whoever attacks fumigage. Hands wrapped around the legs of the villains, a single heft, and half of them were in the air, while the other half was sent to the sides, all like ragdolls as if they weighed nothing. Such was the strength of Dark Shadow in the dark and damp of this area that the villains were at a disadvantage. Regardless of numbers, the shadows were everywhere and Dark Shadow could see from those shadows. There was literally nowhere safe from her. Not with eyes everywhere they tried to hide, not with her eyes connected to his. He turned to the side, and a knife passed near his ankle, slicing fabric and slightly cutting flesh. More like a paper cut, a frown formed on his face, and so did Dark Shadow's own. Shadows wrapped around the villain who launched the knife, gripped him, and then squeezed. The sound of bones breaking was overshadowed by the screams and the sound of rain. "You didn't have to." Dark Shadow Tokurami chided as his arm was covered in an inky substance that grew in mass, raising his arm to the side and blocking the charge of a villain that looked like a rhinoceros. "And I have told you, time and time again." Shadows lashed from his transformed arm, grasping the villain by the horn and twisting him in midair, then slamming him to the ground. First, a resounding crack that surely meant his pelvis was cracked and his tailbone was currently trying to find its way to his throat. To pay attention, she punctuated that by grabbing two villains by the legs, dragging them away, and tossing them back first into walls that cracked under the hit. "People care for you, Fumi. Don't put an air of aloofness. Don't drive them away. They are your light. Oh, how see you a crunch. Do not interrupt me." Fumigage looked to the side, clearly embarrassed by how Dark Shadow was babying him. The not-so-benefits of having an evolved sentient quirk. It was this why they didn't notice the sound of an explosion or the sound of lickers in the distance a minute later. Mountain Zone. Magna raised her large magnet as she took several steps back, magnetizing a passing villain and ensuring her opponent's magnetic charge would impede him. Sure enough, her opponent, that boy with the simple GI and the really thick tail, rushed at her. The equal magnetic forces began to work, deviating him from his attack as his opponent had a larger mass and therefore could ground himself and resist the rejection of both magnetic forces. Magna relished this, then panicked when the boy with the GI simply rushed at the guy instead of her, and by sheer momentum began to push him away, using the repelling forces against him, despite the difference of mass. "Do you really think that trick will stop me?" The boy spoke suddenly, and Magna actually went wide-eyed when she saw him close distance, fighting the magnetic force by sheer something. The villain she magnetized seemed to notice this and tried to attack, using the repelling forces to push the boy back. "Naive," the boy suddenly spoke, already inside the guard of his opponent, fist extended and slightly touching the stomach of his opponent. When did he, Magna thought? When did he cross the distance? When he was able to strike. That little dash, whatever the villain was about to say, ended when his torso suddenly jerked in multiple directions, smoking fist imprints appearing all over his body as he vomited blood and fell to the ground. "The hell?" Magna whispered, eyes widened under her lenses, muscles tensed for a fight. "You lack focus. Will. Commitment," the boy spoke, each word punctuated by a step. "But what should I expect of a bunch of lowlives that think their quirks are powerful but never honed it?" he hissed, tail flicking about like a metronome. "Pretentious punk." Magna was now pissed. This nobody that no one would remember, so simple-looking and normal, seemed to think he could just talk trash without putting the money where his mouth was. The boy simply assumed a stance. She didn't see any openings, until he gave her one, and beckoned her to come to him. "Oh, fuck this guy," she thought as she was already rushing at him, magnet swinging at his head crack. With a single flick of his wrist, the tip of the magnet splintered, like cheap wood under the hit. What dash, then he moved. A single straight punch she ducked under suddenly became 3 hits to her right cheek that broke her shades. Taking several steps back, she lashed with the rest of her magnet. Like a lance, she had dodged and now realized that she had fallen into a trap. She was going to use her magnet and put as much distance from her enemy as she could punch, and suddenly the magnet seemed to struggle with something before it bent and flew away from her hands at a surreal speed, leaving her speechless. "This is what I mean," he said simply. Training Ojiro hissed simply as he rushed at her, and her world exploded into pain. Name, Meshirao Ojiro. Original quirk, tail. Mutated quirk, honed edge. Ojiro's original quirk wasn't anything special, just a tail that he trained up to the point that it was more muscle and he could control with minute precision. That is why he added martial arts to the mix of repertoire, which he did for most of his life, up until the gas. Now Ojiro's own family and quirk tree seem normal, too normal. Then the gas happened, and lacking anything quirk related to enhanced, did the second best thing. It enhanced the mind and body. Honed edge is basically an enhancer and a multiplier. Each time Ojiro trained a move, his body slowly learned it until he could use it without even blinking. However, honed edge caused these trained moves to become extra powerful. It multiplies by a factor of 10 depending on the move and for how long it has been trained, and then multiplies the strength and speed behind it by a factor of 20. A kick he might have been practicing for a week won't have the same effect as a punch he might have been practicing for over 10 years. This also applies to other things, movement, jumps, and even mundane stuff. Crazy is that he has full control over honed edge from the start, needing little training thanks to a lifetime of training a foreign limb like his tail. He is able to rein honed edge in, infusing only speed to his attacks or just brute force. Despite having a very powerful mutated quirk, he is still plain as hell. What the hell? Magna took several steps back, clearly horrified by the sudden show of strength and speed of the plain boy. Lashing with a kick, she instead yelled in pain when he instead had gripped her hand in an insane strong grip and swung her away. She would have hit a rock formation with her back hadn't been for a shot of tape that wrapped around her with a life of its own and swung her into the air. While in the air she spotted the reason, the other kid, the one with the big teeth and that smile that was just one muscle twitch away from being a troll-face smile. "Time to go down," he said. The tape that came out of his knees suddenly retracted, like a cable being towed back by an industrial engine, and she was coming down to the ground. Name, Hantasiro. Original quirk, tape. Mutated quirk, tape X2. Zero's original quirk was a mutation or emitter-type quirk, 2 organic tape dispensers located on his shoulders that are fired with extreme precision, sufficient strength, and are incredibly adhesive. All this forms part of his family tree. He was the one who got saddled with the quirk that worked better compared to his mother or father. Then the gas happened. Zero's mutation was perhaps the most painful out of the members of Class 1A, as the mutation that happened on his elbows happened also on his fully developed knees. 2 extra tape dispensers as powerful as the ones on his elbows and with slots at the front, with the kneecaps now being held by a myriad of tendons and hollowed on the middle to permit the tape to come out. Not a fun mutation to have there. The benefits were, of course, increased mobility, as now 4 limbs meant more ways for mobilization. The tape he fires can actually be set to have a single adhesive side or both sides, have the tensile strength or silk or steel, even retract the fired tape and store it for future usage, and be as annoying and painful to remove or easy and smooth to do so. It depends entirely up to him. One single disadvantage he has, and as far as everyone knows regarding the mutated quirks, is that his skin still flakes and dries off painfully if he fires too much tape. Fortunately, he can drink water to revert these effects, and it happens almost instantly. Almost like a sponge. Magna screamed as she met the unforgiving floor at a slight terminal velocity. A resounding crack that made more than one villain wince at the impact. Yet she was still conscious enough to be angry. With a huff she pushed herself upwards. Eyes now had a dangerous glint on them. "Okay then. Done playing nice lady," Magna declared. "Oh, you were trying before," Zero said as he hooked himself to another villain and reeled himself in, with both feet aimed at the villain's head. Magna growled under her breath as Ojiro once again stood before her. Both ignorant of the sudden explosion in the distance, Magna's entire attention was focused on the brat in front of her. She's going to leave 2 broken corpses when she's done. Landslide zone. Shoto simply glanced around, a small, satisfied smirk forming around his lips as he beheld the semi-frozen forms of several villains. The only thing it wasn't frozen was their heads. He didn't want to kill them, despite their attempts at him. He was better than that. Endeavor has yet to kill a villain that has ruined his lunch just because he was looking for a fight with the number 2. So Shoto decided to take his father's approach and beat the offender up, and leave him for the cops. Better for everyone. Not the EMTs that have to fix the guy, but that's the problem of the villain that thought that attacking someone who lights his face on fire and is not concerned about it is a good idea. You. Shoto rolled his eyes. Of all the villains that had attacked him, this one was the most annoying of them all. Mostly because as Bakugu would say it, Asshat kept using his quirk to leave some sort of half-made gooey copy of himself to get hit instead of himself. Neat trick. His thinking of trying it out, but with ice sculptures, Midoriya seems to use them sparingly. With some practice he could make them part of his action deck. Hey, pay attention, don't look at me. Okay, this spandex-looking guy is starting to annoy him. Yes. Shoto asked. Who do you think you are? I know exactly who you are. If you know who I am, then why are contradicting yourself by saying you know and do not know me? Because I do know your kind. I have no idea what I'm saying. But you do, or you don't. Stop trying to confuse me, or share more of your wisdom. The very few villains that were conscious let out groans. They were not ready for this level of why the lights suddenly blacking out. Shoto had little than 2 seconds to process what was happening before he slammed his foot to the ground, several pillars of pure ice forming around him and shooting upwards. All of them caught the thunders that formed above him and suddenly groaned as a massive black contained fell of the sky. What is going on? The sky is falling. Oh, is Ezekiel Thorne, the Lord has come for us. Take me, God, the man in full spandex screamed as he pumped his arms into the air. Then the sides of the container opened and then the hiss. Shoto's blood became cold, not because of his quirk, mind you, but because he recognized the sound. Lickers. He thought he had stopped hearing their hisses after Hashima. They unnerved him in a way no other creature can hope to achieve. They are showing their muscles and their brains, and despite having no eyes they can find you just fine. That and the tongue that is akin to a harpoon make them a nightmare to stare at. Midoriya had been really specific when it came to those things, and how to deal with them. In all honesty, most of the time his advice for most bows was to nuke them before they can even think to do anything. Solid strategy. That he followed to the letter. The moment the first licker landed on the ground in front of him, their hideous tongues lapping around, tasting the air, Todoroki simply shifted his right leg forward. He had held off a lot against the villains. If one thing his father had put quite firmly in his training was that lethal force was the last resort when literally everything else was off the table, it wasn't an easy call to make, and once made it was impossible to take back. But bows weren't humans, weren't alive in the same way a human being was. They were created to be disposable, made in stock, in a conveyor machine. He felt no pity when his quirk activated and burned or froze the liquor. Holy shit, that was awesome. Name, Shoto Todoroki. Original quirk, half cold, half hot. Mutated quirk, too hot, too cold. The product of a quirk marriage, 4th attempt. Shoto's original quirk was the perfect balance for the old weakness of quirk users with either fire or ice quirks. Too much heat, you cook your organs and boil your blood. Too much cold and you get hypothermia and gangrene. The only back draw was that it was divided into 2 sides of his body. His right side is cold, and his left side is hot one. This gave him the ability to control his own temperature and bypass the crippling weakness his mother, father, and every other ice and fire quirk user has, time in the field, and how much he can use so said quirks without repercussions. The gas, as usual, changed the quirk to a fundamental level. No longer limited to one side of his body, or limb for that matter, Shoto can fire his fire, pun intended, from his whole body, or his ice, or use his ice from his legs and use his fire from his hands. The real upgrade, however, came with the fire and ice in question. He can actually fire them both at the same time, in a strange way, aside from really powerful blasts that are the result of flash-frozen air being superheated really fast. Shoto can also set out what is being called a cocytus substance, a strange purple-looking substance. A strange amalgamation of frozen napalm that doesn't melt when being set ablaze, burns as hot as plasma, and who Shoto has full control over. The only thing the cocytus has been unable to melt has been stasis. Yeah, the frozen napalm that doesn't melt can't do much against the heat death of the universe-given shape, but they do set up quite a light show. The strange, purple-like ice that emanated from his feet seemed to have a life of its own as it chased the liquors that landed out of the container. Shoto noted with some apprehension that several of them were already bleeding. As they landed, the bows instantly zeroed in on the bleeding, wounded, and incapacitated villains. Shit, Shoto cursed, seeing how one liquor didn't even hesitate and clawed the exposed face of one of the villains he had frozen. Now he understood why his father insisted on telling him to focus on combat and leave capture to others. Trying to do it on your own was hard. The purple, burning ice came alive on Shoto's command, each shard becoming more and igniting by a single thought as they captured as many liquors as he could, and they in turn were encased and burned inside the cocytus substance. But it wasn't enough, as these things had tricks of their own. One liquor seemed to be smarter than the norm, as it seemed to look at him, with a shrill scream that made his bones rattle. The thing actually ignited without any input of his, opened its mouth and let out a stream of blood. Shoto panicked, raising a barrier of cocytus that blocked the stream of pressurized blood that steamed on impact. It was there that Shoto noted that the blood was already coming with steam right out of the mouth. Had it hit him, he would have been scalded, or have pieces of skin torn off. It was being fired at high pressure. Shaking his head, he focused on freezing more liquors and saving the villains he had frozen. The irony was palpable, and he was doing the best he could, but there were so many villains, and even more liquors going mental. He didn't notice that the other villain, the crazy one, was long gone, or that All Might had arrived. Central Plaza. Mina cartwheeled away from a gout of blue fire that the guy that looked to be held together by duct tape fired at them without a glance, a mistake that cut the vision of one of her opponents and left him open to the attack. Her pink tail lashing out and wrapping tightly around the neck before she yanked him onward, using the momentum to propel herself onwards and slam her fist on his nose, breaking it and knocking him out. Ducking over a kick, Mina then coated her hands in acid, fingers poised as claws, and lashed out. The villain screamed as the acid of her fingers burned his leg and muscles, making him collapse to the ground and scream in pain and agony. "Oh, come the fuck on," she heard the guy with the disemboweled hands scream. "You're all getting your ass kicked by high schoolers. You should have invested in better henchmen." Mina taunted as she spun away from the leg sweep of another villain. On landing, her tail instantly harpooned itself on the exposed calf of the villain, who screamed like a little girl. "Fuck, she's right," she heard the guy mutter. "Still fuck you. Rude," she called as her tail pulled out of the bloody leg of her target, instantly wrapping her hands around the extended arm of a villain that tried to punch her, pulling herself onwards and then latching herself to the arm, legs used as a pulley to dislocate the arm when she flexed them. Which she did. Shigaraki only could groan as he saw another of his henchmen fall, this time with a dislocated arm, literally yanked out of the socket and held together only by skin and muscle by the waifu-looking pink xenomorph variant. "This is my life now," he must, idly toying with the idea of sending Nomu against the pink menace. But then again, the doctor didn't make the Nomu acid-proof, he made it punch-proof and fireproof. Also, acid sticks more and can sweep into cracks. He's not risking the very thing that can fight All Might just because his henchmen are getting bent over by a talkative pink alien. There was also the little issue of the giant rock-made shark that currently had one of his henchmen in its jaws and was deciding between biting and showering itself on gore or just bite and shake then dumping it. Shigaraki's not gonna lie, a shark is fucking metal, and a land shark is twice as metal. Maybe he can convince the good doctor to make a Nomu-like one. Sharks at the end of the day are apex predators. But this was getting tiresome. He could see how Eraserhead kept his attacks on the remaining henchmen after he decided to disengage and let him tire himself out and measure how long his quirk remains active before he decides to turn it off. At the distance he could see Darby and Kurogiri fighting that other hero, and how the boy wasn't he a wild card. He was actually attacking Darby on melee. No special powers, just pure fisticuffs, fighting someone who uses fire hotter and endeavors. That was fucking awesome. Shigaraki. The troop is here. He had to bit a wait a fucking second. "Excuse me," Shigaraki hissed, having to jump away when that pink menace decided that was high time to take the fight to him and lashed with several globs of pressurized acid at his feet that he had to back jump and pivot backward to not have his feet fucking melted. "Did you just say dash?" Whatever Shigaraki was going to say was halted when the lights of the massive dome began to flicker, slightly drowning the area in darkness for several seconds. "Why are the lights flickering?" he muttered out loud. The pink menace actually heard him, actually saying, "Are you for real?" Then the thunders began to rain, because why not? "It's an anomalous discharge," he heard Gadget before he had to dodge away as thunder nearly hit him. The Nomu, programmed to follow him and protect him, was already moving away and using its bulk to tank the thunders aimed at him. Really? That thing is tanking thunders. What's next? The skull pads dispense fire. The pink menace actually snarked at him as she dodged away from the localized thunderstorm. He had half a mind to snap back, but honestly, the fire-belching kneecaps sounded kinda cool for some reason, and useful too. Who's gonna expect a knee that shoots fire? The troop must have a teleportation device. It uses an electrical discharge at a specific set of coordinates to pretty much create a rip in the space and transport something in, he heard Gadget continue, unaware of what was happening here. Risking a glance, he saw that everyone was now dodging thunderbolts. This was getting ridiculous. But such a thing is a violent procedure, so violent that it explains why some of the bows of the attack months prior were a mess to begin with. Okay, did he heard that right? Teleportation was violent. Since fucking when? One thunder got too close, and he jumped away into the sudden shadow. Excuse me, why there is a shadow? He looked up, and he actually cursed. There, floating in the air, and in the middle of the thunderstorm was a container, floating in the air. Fucky dash. Then there was a mighty crack that boomed over the USJ, and Shigaraki's instincts told him to move. He did. So did the pink menace. So did the Nomu BAMMM. The lights were out for 2 seconds. The 2 longest seconds of Shigaraki's life as the lights came back on, and he finally saw what had made him run away and dive into the ground. It was a container, black in color, easily twice as large as any other container in any shipyard HISSS. And it was making noises he was intimately aware of, noises he was aware the pink menace behind him was aware of as well, considering he heard her curse under her breath. Then the sides of the container doors began to explode in tandem, sending the doors flying away and agitating the things inside. Then the lickers came out, each one of them bleeding and screaming, clawing around as they rushed at the outside, the blood hitting the ground as it ignited. Excuse me. Shigaraki had to jump away as a tongue nearly impaled him on the stomach, seeing how the creature's blood acted as some sort of natural napalm. It ignited them, making them scream in agitation but not pain, and then things got crazier as they began to vomit blood. One such jet of blood hit one mook in the face, and Shigaraki decided there and there that Nomu would have to make do because the mook's face just got flayed off, exposing a reddened skull and patches of muscle and skin. Nomu! Shigaraki screamed, pointing at the lickers that caught his scream. Kill those motherfuckers. The Nomu let out a shrill wail as it moved at an unnatural speed not befitting its bulk and crushed 5 lickers with its rushing bulk alone. This is some fucking bullshit. I can't even commit murder without the troop coming to ruin it all. Shigaraki complained, seeing how the pink menace was eyeing the Nomu with wary eyes. Yeah, that's my Nomu. Designed to kill All Might. You're in luck I didn't decide to sick it at you because I won't waste my most precious unit on a scrub, he hissed as he hunched and prepared to attack her. As you could, the fuck is that? She suddenly hissed, black eyes widened in shock. Please, Shigaraki rolled his eyes. That's the oldest trick in th. The Nomu let out a screech of pain, and now that made him turn around, and he actually blinked. His Nomu, which was surrounded by the corpses of several lickers, was being besieged by what he assumed was living mercury. A substance that was metallic and was alive, moving with purpose, liquid-like tentacles clamping around and using leverage whenever they could move out of his Nomu's reach whenever it tried to remove them. But for something that large, the back would always be the hardest place to reach. Then he heard it. He saw it first. He heard the pink menace behind him gasp in shock when she saw it too. That living mercury just burrowed in the spine of his Nomu, the agony the artificial being had to be monumental. Despite the claims of the doc that it couldn't feel pain, he was hearing that thing scream in pain. The skin and muscle bulged as the mercury entity moved inside. It was disconcerting to see, especially when the skin on the chest descended onward, sagged, and then became taut as hyperregeneration kicked in and put the skin back in place. But man, the entire sight was fucking disgusting. Even more, as Shigaraki could hear how that living mercury was moving about inside his Nomu and displacing skin, muscle, and organs. All while his Nomu twitched and did all it could to remove the now parasite from inside its body. Shigaraki heard it all first, how bones began to creak and be moved about, how skin and muscle bulged, eventually all settling as the distinguishable sound of meat rupturing was heard, and he saw the exposed brain of his Nomu leak the mercury, and so said mercury move about, covering the brain in a dome, closing the gaping and obvious weak point. He always wondered why the doc made them with exposed brains. Lickers are like that because their brains grow out of their skulls and cover their eyes. Nothing to do about it there. But he never understood the logic behind having exposed brains on the Nomus, or how they survived with an exposed brain, to begin with. As the dome finally covered the brain, his Nomu finally stopped twitching like a crack addict, stilling and letting its massive arms drop, like the arms of a puppet whose strings had been cut off. While Shigaraki rarely felt fear and dread, the only times he did so was when Sensei was angry, which was rare in itself, but when it happened Shigaraki felt fear by proxy. Now, hearing his Nomu, a creature Doc had assured would obey him without a complaint and couldn't speak because it was effectively a meat puppet. Well, he felt fear now. This is interesting. The voice was clearly feminine, digitized, and distorted by whatever that grey goop did to Nomu, and the fact, Well, it had no lips. It had a beak with cruel, jagged teeth. It couldn't talk. It shouldn't be able to. What an interesting abomination you made. Shigaraki, he recognized the voice, and by the looks of it, so did the pink menace behind him. Yuso said. Menace hissed. You're the voice in the base at Hashima, she cried in anger. Oh, the Nomu spoke. Its an expressionless face made the questioning leer it gave far more intimating than it should. Oh well, looky here, one of my experiments. I'm so glad to see how much you all have advanced, the Nomu spoke, slowly advancing, and with each step making a thump that made Shigaraki gulp and heart to hammer in anxiety. We are not your experiments. The pink menace hissed angrily, tail lashing angrily and with its point aimed at the Nomu, like the stringer of a scorpion. Oh! The Nomu stopped, now moving about with far more emotion than it should. You all were mutated by the gas of my creation. So far this has been just stage 2 of a very entertaining experiment. Shigaraki now was taking several steps back, seeing how the lickers that at one point were attacking the Nomu were now docile, despite being in fucking fire. And Shigaraki, so glad you are here. Tell me how's all for one. Still using a respirator to survive. Shigaraki was now in full panic. This fucking thing just tossed Sensei's name and weakness as if it was candy. But I'm not here to socialize, it spoke, slowly making the Nomu flex its massive hands. What an interesting construct you have here. Heavily modified but so sloppily made. I mean, it has no kidneys and the entire ribcage is just a massive bone instead of several smaller, flexible ones, it said with an air of arrogance, slowly cranking its neck and jumping on the spot. But I can see the amount of care it was put into accepting quirks. How lovely, it added with mirth. Sadly, I can't test this against Midoriya. I would love to see if these fire insulations could withstand those hammers of his. You know, they burn with the heat of a star, the Nomu spoke. And now Shigaraki had no doubt that the situation had no salvation. The plan was kaput. Kurogiri. Shigaraki screamed. Flight. It was a password, something written into the sentient Nomu's mind. Only he and Sensei could activate as it was keyed to their voices. It was basically a getting the hell out of Dodge command without the platitudes of explaining why. We are leaving now. Just a single word and that was it. Of course, the command also included the rest of the league without the fodder because he'll be damned if he leaves such valuable assets behind. The fodder was replaceable. The elites were a pain to train and bond with. Apparently, his order came just at the right time. Boom. Because he just heard an explosion, the sound of metal being bent, and of course that voice. Worry not, students. I am here. Oh goody, I get to test the synapse response at distance. Okay, no were Shigaraki's thoughts as he heard Darby's sudden squeak of shock as Kurogiri opened a portal under his feet and pretty much Looney Tunes his ass into the hideout because out of all the league, Darby was the one to get too into the fights and it was a pain to get him out the funk of combat. Ironic, he considered that Toga would be the one to be hard to snap out of her bloodlust. But apparently, she can control herself, somewhat. Speaking of, he has to pick her up. Last he heard of her or gadget is that she intercepted Midoriya. So either she killed him and he would come across her drinking his blood out of his corpse, or he beat her up and would have to contend against someone who the doctor was waiting to test one of the higher tiers of Nomus against. When it's ready. Oh hell no. Get your ass here, you crusty ass hat. Okay, being called crusty was getting old, even if only Sensei did it. But when a hero of all things does so, it's crossing the line. Yeah, no. See you all at All Might's funeral. Shigaraki said as he saw All Might land. He wasn't in the mood to fight the symbol of peace, especially with such odds against them. Nomu was their ace in the hole, and the fucking troop fucked it all up, which begged the question of how they knew they were going to attack the USJ. Obviously, it had to come. From somewhere he doesn't know he's done for the day, he just wants to go to bed and let his brain dream the solution to this because right now he's running on circles. As he stepped out of the portal into Gadget's position, because he isn't leaving his tech expert behind even if Sensei put a gun on his head, his first sight was of Toga going through a reinforced glass, sending pieces all over the floor, then landing at his feet, probably dead or alive, he doesn't know. Yeah, this day has gone to the shitter, Gadget. Shigaraki yelled as he motioned the kid to leave, seeing him how he took the laptop he brought and entered the portal. Let me guess, the troop jammed our comms. Shigaraki asked as he saw the smoke from the portal slowly envelop Toga and drag her into the portal. No, Gadget said. It was the spatial anomaly that they used to teleport. It causes an EMP effect and a suppression of comms and a side effect. Yeah, we are getting out of here. Get into the portal, Shigaraki said as he finally saw him. The doctor's latest obsession, a quirk user with so much power that his body should have failed on the first go, Yet the body apparently had evolved to take the energies, evolved past the point of being human and being unnaturally natural. Sometimes the doctor gets too fancy with words. Yet he had to admit that an 8-foot-tall, jacked-as-hell rabbit covered in lighting and clothed in cultists' robes that had armor on was somewhat an intimidating look, especially after bodying Toga. He knew Toga had so many quirks that the only reason she lost was that she got all dokidoki with the last person on the planet that wanted to get like that with her. He saw Midoriya take a step forward. If he gained momentum, then things would get ugly. They were in retreat, not to fight right now. So he took a decision. If I were you, he began, his eyes burrowing on the electric ones of the were-rabbit, I would start to worry about your friends and instead of me. The troop is here. He gave Midoriya another target to worry about, and knowing the story between Midoriya and the troop, he would go against the troop. And I seriously doubt they are here to make friends. Especially after hijacking My Nomu, he finalized as he entered the portal, ignoring the question of Midoriya directed to him. He had done as Sensei had taught him, tantalize, warn, and make them choose between two impossible choices. Alternatively, high-grade trolling, as he once said. He knew that Darby would be fuming, but honestly, he could care less. The plan didn't factor the fucking troop, so better to withdraw and let both forces bloody one another. The idea here was to win. It never specified they had to do so with honorable means. His first sight of the USJ interior was simply chaos. There was no other way around it. All Might was used to the chaos. Being the #1 hero meant that most of the time he was called to help in disaster zones where rescue heroes, far better capacitated than him for the task, were called in mass. But the chaos that he was seeing now was only comparable to the one during the troop assault of Japan months ago, only that villains were involved into the mess and according to Hero Dispatch an unknown bow that the villains brought, not the troop. That alone rose several red flags in his head. The troop might be the foremost user and creator of bows in the world, but that didn't mean they were the only ones to make them or use them. It spoke of a sophistication only one international villain group had, Hummerais. But Hummerais had remained largely silent after the troop attacks of Japan, and Hummerais never used bows as they saw them as uncontrollable abominations worse than quirk users. Shaking his head, All Might strode into the USJ, the doors that had tried to stop him already at the bottom of the stairs, broken and bent. With some distaste, he saw several villains charge at him. This was obviously an attack on his students to get to him. Well, they have his undivided attention now. Blurring out of sight, he blitzed a dozen charging villains, all of them keeled to the ground, unconscious as he strode onward, spooking the remaining villains, but apparently not enough as they charged at him again. With a sigh, the symbol of peace blurred out of sight once more, his fists impacting the guts and jaws of his opponents even before their brains could register his sudden movement and sudden spike of pain, all dropping to the ground in boneless heaps as some noise of combat died down around the USJ. The students, Melissa, Izuku. They are okay, he thought with a grimace as he finally made his way to the central plaza, eyes focused as Kirishima and Eshido tag-teamed one unfortunate villain while Eraserhead and HPH regrouped, tense and on guard. Then, he saw it, the reason why they were tense. As tall as him and broader than Endeavor. Muscles that seemed to actually tear the dark blue skin off. The cruel beak with equally cruel teeth where nothing to the metal dome that covered its head or the beady eyes that displayed no emotion. Well, All Might. So glad you're here, it spoke in a digitized feminine voice, a little rough but it spoke. Excuse me, what? Was all he could say, because honestly what else he could say at that moment. Sensei, don't talk to it, fight it. Mina all but screamed to the symbol of peace. That thing was brain dead until it got that on its head. It obeyed the villains that invaded the USJ. Mina screamed, already done with the last villain like Kirishima. The controlled Nomu simply looked at the assembled group, then actually reached and tapped the metallic covering on its head, what seemed to be a grin forming on its beak. You mean this? A test run, if you will, the creature began. Controlling a bow is not the same as controlling a T-doll or a mech, you know, the creature explained. Bows are set loose with a predetermined set of rules and parameters they must obey. There is no free will. The Nomu spoke, then did something unexpected. It chuckled. It was a non-comical chuckle, as if realizing something. I see. A man chooses, a slave obeys. Mina's tail instantly shot up in an attack position and crouched low. Kirishima hissed as he squared up and got ready for anything. How funny. To come to this realization after building this, the Nomu spoke as it pointed at its head. How can I say this without angering him? The Nomu spoke with mirth. Its sheer bulk oozed mirth at some untold joke. I never mind that, At the end of the day, all that matters is what he provided to me without even trying, the Nomu spoke as it began to slowly jump on the spot, landing each time on its toes and doing it again. Incredible, the Nomu spoke. The synapses on this thing are tangled in such a way. It can feel pain. I can feel pain now. Sympathetic pain, I suppose, but this thing, this Nomu. So Frankenstein in design, it added as it clenched a fist. The sound of muscles tensing underneath the already tense skin was heard from where the gathered heroes and students were. I originally intended to test this against Midoriya, to test how his advanced synapses would handle such an invasive procedure, but the Nomu spoke, now taking deliberate steps towards them. Mina and Kirishima took instinctively steps backward as it advanced at them. This is much better, a dead body being brought back by unknown means, with operating organs and stitched-up quirks and greatly enhanced for one purpose only, kill you, All Might. After saying that, the Nomu slowly kneeled, readying itself. Brainless, it would have failed. Let's see how it fares with an actual, functioning brain, muscles tensed, slightly bulging. Then it moved. Mina's more animalistic instincts alongside Kirishima's screamed at them to move. Which they did. Thing was, they weren't fast enough. Mina was the first to see it, how the massive bulk of the Nomu was already in front of her, hand raised as a backhand, ready to slap her, muscles tensed and ready to burst from the skin that was struggling to contain them. Then it swung BAMMM. Mina had never been so glad to see All Might move as well at that moment as well, a large fist meeting the face of the Nomu. Face deforming under the blow, skin rippling under the sheer force of the impact. The telltales of lingering solar light that she and the class had grown accustomed to seeing whenever Izuku used his Well of Dawn to heal any lingering wounds after a hard day of training. The Nomu was stopped, but it skidded several feet and then stopped by sheer force of bulk and whatever quirk it might have. Ouch! The female voice emanated again from the male Nomu in such a sarcastic way that made Mina's skin crawl. The pain receptors are there, but they are so smothered over such a chemical cocktail that only dismemberment would make it scream bloody murder. It spoke again, beak moving left and right as if trying to relieve the ache after such a punch. Did you know, All Might, that the creator of this Nomu made it with fire-insulent quirks, and even the skin was grafted over to ensure maximum protection against you and the quantum fire you now wield? Not at the same level as Midoriya, but enough to be a cause of concern, the Nomu said as if discussing the weather, rolling its head around. But enough talk. I have seen you fight. You don't learn much by explaining, you learn by acting. So, let's teach you a lesson again. It moved at such speed that Mina barely could follow its trail. Boom. But she was painfully made aware of where it was when both the creature and All Might clashed, forearms meeting in a stalemate as they tried to overpower one another. It lasted for 3 seconds before they broke over and began to swing at each other. Boom. 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 Large fists met one another with such force that it sounded like tank shells being fired and hitting another tank shell up front of how loud and destructive each hit was. Shockwaves traveled over the epicenter of the fight while Mina and A-Hero tried to hold to the ground for dear life, while Eraserhead and HPH kept an arm over their faces, covering their mouths and part of their eyes, but focused on the fight, knowing that any opening could be used. Eventually, both combatants' punches met one another and a small lull fell over the fighting arena. Someone took advantage. Mina, spurned out of sheer instinct to deal with whatever this thing was, moved first, moving low at such speed that no normal human, quirk or no, should be able to. When she was close enough, she rose her right arm, palm coated in a highly corrosive acid, the strongest she could make and that could hurt her, and fired in the exposed flank. The controlled Nomu realized this late when a huge chunk of the torso and the left arm were exposed to this acid, and it ate the skin and muscle and kept doing it, the sizzling sound echoing over the area as the Nomu did a face that seemed to be pained. Okay, still vulnerable to acid and it hurts, the controlled Nomu hissed as the exposed arm melted and fell to the ground with a thump that echoed over the field and showed just how much the Nomu weighed in total. Then there was the torso, bones, outlines of organs and blood was visible as the acid melted the skin and muscles. The Nomu looked horrible, then it made a face. Mina stared, horrified as the creature began to grow skin, muscle, and organs back as easily as breathing. Organs that were no longer functional began to pulse back into function. Bones melted into useless slag and grew back as if it was hair. Muscle and skin knitted together as if staring at a speed-up picture of someone knitting a sweater. The same happened to the arm. It grew back, bone first, then veins, then muscles, then skin, and then it was good as new if even the skin was somewhat pale. Hyper-regeneration, the Nomu spoke, some sort of awe in its artificial feminine voice. Can sense 5, no 6 quirks that grant self-regeneration crammed into one. How devious, how elegantly brutish, the Nomu said with a grin forming under its beak. Can't even imagine how they did it. God, Mina had already taken several steps back, seeing how that thing just grew, everything she just melted. Everything in this Nomu is cobbled together. However, I can make do with this, learning how to make a quirk without the need to wait 9 months and find 2 pairs of willing individuals is appealing. I could even use this as a base frame for a better nemesis. Midoriya does keep going through them like candy. All Might had heard enough. He was already in front of the Nomu, fist raised high. With a yell, he let loose a powerful straight at the Nomu. The fist met the face and rose smoke all over the two, but the Nomu didn't even flinch. My, someone's angry, the Nomu said with clear mirth. To be perfectly fair, All Might was angry. This thing was suggesting that he was still alive, even after the killing blow he inflicted on the man, a caved skull and removed whole of his face like removing a sheet of paper from a book. With a scowl, All Might launched a vicious uppercut at the Nomu that had the intended effect, lifting the creature from its feet. But the Nomu simply rolled on the air and landed hard on the ground, not a wound in sight. Damn it, this was getting old. 2 hits tanked, and so far only young Eshido was able to make significant damage that was healed. Wait, All Might thought as he clashed with the Nomu, who looked non-pulsed by the attack it was going to receive. So far it has tanked all my attacks, all my punches. Young Eshido's attack was chemical. It went right through its defense. That's it can withstand kinetic-based attacks. But anything else, he let the idea hang up as he reached deeper, touching the embers of One for All. Nana had once said to him that once she passed One for All to him, she felt the inferno in her become a fireplace, one that was slowly dying out because of lack of fuel to burn. When he passed OFA to Melissa, he felt the same as Nana once did. The once great inferno of power now reduced to embers flickering under the wood they once burned, and only when stoked could show their might once more. But he had something else. Young Midoriya had gifted it when trying to heal his wounds. It had latched onto OFA. It had latched to him. Melissa now had it too, but she didn't know how to call it yet, not without her control. He did. Reaching deep, he stoked the ember of One for All with the light, and a sun came forth as an answer. All Might was instantly enveloped in a coat of fire that invigorates him. Years of fatigue instantly erased are temporarily, as he is brought to half the level of what he used to be before his wounds. More than enough for any bow created. Oh, bringing the big guns then, the Nomu said as a clear attempt at a taunt. I have no time to entertain you, All Might growls. My students' safety comes first. Bringing you down means ensuring their safety. The Nomu actually regards him with a small grin forming on the beak. Okay then. I got what I want from this. I really wanted to know what made Midoriya tick, how his quirk operates, and how to replicate it. But I can live with this consolation price. I am getting something out of this. After all, her answer for that was a solar-infused fist that caved the beak and sent her reeling backwards and spinning towards the ground, where it slowly stood up after a second, beak slowly taking its original form back. This time, the Nomu remained silent, slowly assuming a combat stance. Then they moved. Momo didn't know where the old man with the deadly aim, the leader of this group of villains, had gone, only that there was gone, and it had made her paranoid enough to actually make a single handgun with live ammo and a stun baton and make her way off the room she and Kyoka had entrenched themselves. On their way out, because Gyro isn't leaving Yoamomo alone, they encountered Mineta, panting for air and bleeding from his scalp. That's new. I mutate and I still bleed from my scalp. This is bullshit, Mineta whined, reaching for his forehead and cleaning the blood there with his hand. Is it over? The roar of a villain was his answer. One that was drowned when Momo aimed her gun at the villain and fired. Gyro and Mineta jumped in shock as the villain collapsed to the ground in pain, clutching his knee and crying. You fucking bitch, you shot Emmy, the villain screamed as tears pooled in his eyes. Be glad I just shot you on the knee with a simple bullet. Could have been an explosive round or hollow point. You would have nothing attached to the knee if that had been the case, Momo snarled as she kneeled in front of the villain, strapped the gun to her waist, gripped the villain by the hair, and then put the electric baton over his neck. Now you're going to tell me who were the masterminds behind these attacks, or so God help me I will feed you your own teeth, she snapped. You're a hero, the villain whispered. Heroes don't do that. He began to panic. I just heard the shrill call of lickers, heard you and your boys said what you were going to do to me and my friend and got shot. Right now I am a teenager with a powerful quirk looking for something to vent all this anger. You look well enough to take it, big boy. So talk. Gyro and Mineta glanced at one another and swore never to anger Momo, especially after the villain began to talk. Even Buddha had a limit on his patience. Melissa ducked under a claw of a villain while a licker tried to blindside her, only for her to move to the side and the charging creature ended up attacking the villain. The man screamed as the flaming creature began to tear him frantically. Grunting, she channeled OFA on her legs and lashed with a kick that would have made soccer players proud, her armored feet meeting exposed flesh and liquefying organs on impact. The licker was dead before even hitting the ground once more. TTT then KU, the villain weakly groused where he was, bloody and barely grasping to consciousness. Thankfully, he was alive, but that could change easily as Melissa saw more lickers making their way to them. She was ready to fight them until a massive boulder met the charging horde midway, bones and skin rupturing and blood that burned around coming out, making her wary of now wounding them. Looking around, she saw Okuko float back to her, landing with a thud as she disengaged her quirk with a tap of her fingers. Spalt. Also, 3 lickers fell headfirst behind her and instantly set the floor on fire. Why their blood burns things? Okuko asked, seeing how Koda trotted back to them, slowly transforming into his normal form. Some cuts on his arms, but overall he was fine. Can't really say, Melissa said as she reached for her compiece. Izuku, you better answer, Melissa-san. Is everyone okay? Relief filled her blood. He was fine, which was honestly the best news so far. They could regroup and then mount a counteroffensive with Izuku as their healer. Yeah, me, Okuko and Koda are okay. There was this crazy blonde chick with blood claws, but she left God knows where, Melissa answered. Kept calling me Hick. Freaking unbelievable. Yeah, met her a while back while trying to reach the command room. Got a little bit of news, Izuku answered, which now made her frown. Look, we know we got reinforcements coming soon, that's great. At her side, Melissa saw Okuko sigh in relief with Koda, who had a small smile on his lips. Yeah, well, remember that blonde girl with blood claws? He began. Not a second later she heard a thump behind her and she turned to see Izuku land near her, already transformed into his zoanthrope form. Then he turned back into his human form and removed his helmet, mask. Why he has rabbit ears as a human. We got issues. Eraserhead grunted in pain as another blast of wind impacted him and made him reel towards a villain that had the brilliant idea of attacking him and in effect everyone else, while All Might, who was enveloped in paracausal fire, and a talking Nomu that had the voice of a girl and was being puppeteered by the troop, duped it out. He says the word brilliant with all the sarcasm possible because he instantly reels his leg and slams it to the villain's tensed right leg, or to be more precise, his tense knee. Crack! Even before the man can scream, he is wrapping his head with his capture cloth and slamming his head on the unforgiving ground with a resounding crack. Wait, that All Might and the Nomu fists meeting once more. Again the Nomu's limb break was no surprise considering that it took a monster that was as old as the current quirked society to wound the symbol of peace, so this thing getting its shit pushed in wasn't much of a surprise. All Might was doing well, but for how long? Eraserhead couldn't help, not with so many villains around. Neither the students, for obvious reasons. They might have survived Hashima, but they weren't ready, not yet. Biting a curse, Eraserhead once more moved away from another villain that tried to blindside him, lashing out with several hooks to the ribs and a straight to the exposed throat, hearing everything crack under the hits. Turning to the fight again, he activated his quirk, focusing solely on the Nomu as All Might lay several punishing blows to the stomach of the creature that singed the flesh and lifted it off the ground only for the symbol of peace to do something unexpected. Suddenly twist on his feet and raise his leg in a kick. Smash! Boom! Aizawa gritted his teeth as he felt his bones rattle at the sudden kick and power behind it, not to mention he saw what it did to the Nomu. It had impacted it dead center, and now the back was missing several pieces of itself. Of course, the damned thing didn't even look non-pulsed. Whatever it was handling this thing, like a sock puppet, made it quite clear this was all just a field test, something to test new things to be sued against Midoriya, against All Might. And if they worked against them, they would work very well against anyone else. The Nomu seemed to regain its footing, and whoever was controlling it realized who was the real problem. Aizawa's blood ran cold when the beady, dead eyes of the creature turned to him. Then it moved. He had little time to even take a step back, the only thing that saved his head from getting crushed under several kilos of augmented muscle. Bam! It didn't save him from the sudden Spartan kick that made him feel like he shattered everything on his torso, sending him flying, barreling towards whatever would stop his body. Aizawa! He vaguely heard 13 scream to him. A slight push to his body made him realize she was using Black Hole's massive suction power to steer him towards her and away from whatever his landing zone would crunch. Landing roughly on the ground and tumbling away, he was able to reorient himself, despite the pain, and saw the Nomu holding 13 by the forearms, fists closed over them, 13 kicking and screaming in pain. Thankfully Fulgore appeared. Wait a minute. His eyes weren't tricking him, It was the machine whose design was taken off the Hashima-based databanks, the one Midoriya named Fulgor, landing behind the Nomu and deploying its two plasma-based claws from its forearms, instantly running them on the arms of the beast and liberating 13 who fell to the ground, only to be picked up by two cyber ninjas that dashed her way and away of the fight. The Nomu simply glanced at the machine before All Might had decked the bow in the face, hard, breaking the upper beak in two. Aizawa slowly tried to stand. Hearing the steady staccato of gunfire he easily recognized coming from Snipe's monster revolver. The snap of Midnight's whip. The mechanical whirl of Power Loader's armor. Nedzu's maniacal laughter. They were here. Thank fuck. Trying to stand up again, he saw two villains making their way toward him, their intentions clear. Can't catch a break, he mused as he prepared himself to fight, only to sigh in relief when he saw Okuko land on one of them, her form easily making the adult villain buckle and face plant while the other got an armored fist to the back of the head, courtesy of Melissa, the energy of her quirk crackling over her form. Feeling a tug on his form, he looked upward, seeing Izuku pulling him away. Why he had rabbit ears when he is obviously not transformed. Come on, sensei, Izuku groused. You don't get to die here yet, he snapped, yet talking seemed to be the worst thing to do. Silence, he heard silence. His eyes turned to the fight once more, seeing how the Nomu was now looking at them. No, at Izuku. Well, the creature groused in a feminine, playful tone. I was looking for you, Leviathan. Aizawa felt the sudden stiffening of Izuku by his grip, how he seemed to be shocked. He didn't need to look back to know the boy had his eyes wide. You, Izuku breathed. The doll was all Izuku said as he gathered all his strength and tossed Eraserhead away, seeing what the pro did not. The creature moved, easily ignoring the double assault of All Might and Fulgor, gravel and rock breaking under its foot as it moved to Izuku. By instinct and nothing else, Izuku summoned the fourth horseman and instantly activated the glyphs on the barrel of the gun, took aim from the hip, and once the Nomu, 3 times his size, was looming over him, he opened fire. All this happened in a fraction of a second. All 4 barrels lit up with the glyphs, one with fire and ice glyphs, forming evanescence. Other barrel had the knife glyphs lit up, a third one lit up with an axe one, and the last one lit up with Fulgor. All went out at the same time. Boom! Izuku screamed as each round began to hit the Nomu, smoke, blood, and body parts flying about as he pressed the trigger, and the unnatural recoil of the fourth horseman forced him to use his strength to keep the shot aimed at the center of mass. The figure of the Nomu was obscured by the amount of smoke, and the staccato of the gun firing honestly drowned the sounds of fighting. Surprisingly, it drowned Izuku's screams, a feat on its own. In less than 5 seconds, Izuku had depleted the ammo reserves of the fourth horseman and took several steps back, pulling the empty magazine away and replacing it with a fresh one. That thing seemed to be oh dear. The smoke cleared, showing the effects of the fourth horseman on the Nomu. Barely skin was left, muscles were blasted away and held together by some ligaments. The arms had been blasted off instantly, leaving a torso that had several, smoking, freezing holes that had also knives and axes embedded in the flesh. One could see the organs if one dared, and one axe had actually made it to the head, splitting the face in 2. Blood poured liberally from the wounds, and by some miracle, that thing hasn't fallen in 2, considering that there was no midsection to speak of, only the spine connecting the torso and the pelvis. Everything in the middle was gone. Fuck, he heard Melissa hiss. And they say us Americans are excessive with guns, she added with a slight grimace. Is that thing dead? Okuko asked. No, Izuku's eyes there was a crack. Izuku was sure there was a crack. Oh wait, that was one of his ribs, or the armor of his suit giving in. The air was stolen from his lungs. Gravity held no meaning and there was pain. The fourth horseman flew out of his hands as he rolled on the ground from the force of the impact. Skidding on the ground and stopping, Izuku could only watch as the corpse moved at blinding speed. Melissa tried to land a punch on the axe embedded in the face, trying to ram it deeper, only for an arm to grow from where it once was and meet her gut with a thunderous and metallic sound that stole her air and actually sent her flying away. Okuko was next, another arm, this one wrapped around her extended arm. With a single flick, and Izuku heard a crunch and Okuko screamed. But the creature wasn't so lucky, as gravity seemed to quadruple on it and cause it to take a knee, a black aura around it. With a snarl, it tossed Okuko away just as All Might arrived to deliver a powerful punch to the back of the creature's head. But the thing would not be deterred. Turning around and without Okuko causing gravity alteration, a hand like a claw shot out and found purchase on All Might's flank, where his old wound was. A grunt escaped All Might's lips, one that became pained as the Nomu lifted it by the wound and tossed it away, just in time to headbutt a punch Fulgor sent, then retaliate with an uppercut to the torso that tore the machine in two. Izuku only had time to scream as the creature was on top of him, a foot meeting his left shoulder and making him scream in agony as bones broke there, his scream rattling the USJ itself. But he would not go down without a fight. With his free hand he summoned Samurai's Edge, aimed and fired at the beast's torso, massive axes that met the healed flesh and made the creature take several steps back. Useless, the Nomu stated as it reached for Izuku's free hand. His right wrapped its massive hand on his wrist and twisted. The snap of bone and metal was only drowned by the scream of Izuku, one shorter but equally pained. "Now, I have you in my grasp." Izuku's pained movements instantly stopped, now harshly looking at the Nomu. "No, I do." Then he took a deep breath. Krilunaus. A potent wave of purple energy hit the Nomu directly, causing it to suddenly scream as it twitched, stepping away from Izuku. Gathering his strength, Izuku noted how his wrist was slowly setting itself back into place, painfully so. He could still feel his fingers, painful as it was, so he focused on the Nomu and gathered what he could. Once he had it all, he clenched his hand, an agony, an apobiosis was unleashed. Each bio-thunder hit the Nomu straight up and made its nerves seize up. Unknown to Izuku, he caused catastrophic damage to the creature. "Step away from my student." All Might's voice made Izuku relieved, especially since it allowed him time to start consuming the concrete from the ground. It is a slow process considering that apparently, that nutjob Toga messed up his ability to consume the elements he was attuned to. Wonderful. He had little time to wallow in joy as his torso was suddenly enveloped in a pinky rope, a slimy one. "Please be Asura-san, villains attacked us." "You must call me Tsuyu-chan from now on," Izuku groaned as he was dragged away, seeing how All Might just outright pummeled the Nomu that was unable to do anything to defend itself. Strange, apobiosis should have worn down by now, unless, like the nemesis back with the Pussycats compound. Their nervous system must be a mess, and suddenly hitting them with something that scrambles them further must be a killing blow, Izuku rationalized as he was dragged away by Tsuyu. Izuku tried to accommodate himself so he could see what was going on. He could barely see Yuga helping Okako walk away from the fight, her right arm broken by the wrist, and the knowledge he could not heal it or anyone with his powers the way they were now hurt more than his shoulder. As he was dragged away, he saw the continued assault of All Might against the Nomu. He was just letting out all his frustrations into a punching bag that could take his hits. A powerful, vicious, and rather noisy hook to the face had the Nomu stumble and spin on its feet. Looking punch-drunk, then it stumbled into Endeavor. It stumbled into an angry Endeavor. It stumbled into an angry Endeavor that, without measuring a single thought, rammed his right hand on the open jaw of the creature up to the elbow. Then he heated up. The flames of his costumes lit up almost to white. The flames of his face vanished. All his power focused on the flames he suddenly ejected from his hand inside the Nomu's gullet, causing the creature's midsection to glow for an instant. FWWOSHH. Right before every orifice it had suddenly ejected white-hot flames. The extremities suddenly boiled and emanated flames as well, while the head simply melted under the utter cruel onslaught. Then Endeavor pulled his arm out, covered in soot instead of slime, and before the creature collapsed, All Might brought a powerful punch to the head of the creature. Damaged as it was, the head caved in and turned into mush, and whatever the metal dome was made off, splattering the floor before it finally collapsed, not even twitching. Even as he heard the sound of fighting and the shrieks of lickers being killed and villains begging for mercy, Izuku knew. It was over, for now. "Well, that sucked," M98 muttered to herself, a single cable poking out of the back of her neck before it detached with a small click and retracted back into a slot on the chair she was in. Rubbing her neck in phantom pain, delicious pain, M98 stayed still for 5 seconds as her body adjusted back. The feeling of the frankly messed up the body of the Nomu compared to hers was way different. Even her old body after the Colosseum wasn't as such of a mess as the Nomu's own. But then again, that's what happens when you use a corpse to make a fully functioning BOW. It was an inspired move, but one that ultimately depends heavily on the corpse in question, and the condition is in when the process of transformation begins. A fresh, undamaged corpse might yield a better bow than one that has its chest riddled with bullet holes or is missing half of its head or the neck's broken or is burned to a crisp. Many ways to die, and many ways the process can be complicated. It was better to create them from scratch. The human genome has been decoded for quite some time, and even with the mutations quirks brought up, the basic structure of the human DNA remained the same. Not even with the amount of bows killed by Midoriya and taken into morgues for study, no one realized that in the end, every bow the troupe has is essentially human, but heavily mutated before they are formed, clones from stock DNA from humans before the age of quirks. Blood is the main source, but the usage of frozen sperm and eggs is a close second for the acquisition of fresh, raw material for the creation of BOW. Cracking her neck, that felt so good. She exited the small room she had purposed for the usage of the new element that would allow her to learn more without risking herself. The remote assimilator was a rather inspired idea by one member of the former staff that wanted to ensure T-dolls could operate without risk of getting damaged by allowing full control of a BOW, most of the times a tyrant, and giving them the ability to fight while keeping them out of harm's way. Acting as both an expeditionary force and an expendable shock unit, it would give the T-doll valuable data when they would engage. The problem was that the higher-ups didn't even consider that as viable, despite the technological advancements they achieved. For them, T-dolls were far pricier and easier to look bows. The reason why she gave the man who had the idea for this a quick, painless death in the first place, he had sought to advance things and ensure progress, something the troops stood on but were too much hypocrites to admit they wanted only one thing. Power. Granted, so did she, but for different reasons. Walking around the now clean halls, dried-up blood was not good to look at, or smell. M98 simply began to hum a small tune as she made it to the server room. The recollection of raw data from this fight alone was astonishing. A direct fight with all might, and the data she collected from fighting the oldest active hero was a boon alone on its own, which might allow her to figure out better ways to fight heroes and villains. The data of the Nomu alone was both enlightening and disturbing at the same time. Somewhere out there was someone capable of creating bows of a higher tier than the ones made by the troop, and even those she handcrafted as a surprise in Hashima. Someone with the tech and the know-how was able to match an international terrorist organization, with cells all over the world and technology only available on Island. Someone used corpses to make what were essentially super zombies. Whoever this person was had direct ties with All for One, which in itself was concerning considering the man had the biggest stock of quirks that dated back to the very beginning of the quirk era and apparently was old enough to claim to have seen it all happen. All this made things interesting. She ain't gonna lie and say she ain't worried, because she is. Between this and another spike in Midoriya's own powers complicated matters greatly, especially since S.H.I.E.L.D. survived. Not that she expected another result other than death after what she did, but in the end, she was operating on a plan from someone else, not one of her own. Like really, a bomb. That's so basic, but at the same time so untraceable. She can't still believe S.H.I.E.L.D.'s own mother drew that plan in order to cripple Island should they build something that actually threatened USA superiority, at least in that woman's eyes. Not that anyone knew about that. Only the woman herself, who had remained bitterly silent, and the servers from she pulled that plan and some data from had gone dark. M98 was suspecting it had been a trap, but there was no trace of malware on the data she got. But she's suspecting the point of that was to see if someone was stupid, crazy, or talented enough to pull something like stealing from the servers of a governmental agency. Maybe I'm overthinking it, she thought as she shook her head and finally made it to the server room. If that had been a trap all along, she has yet to see an indication of such. Maybe, just maybe it had been an honest mistake, an error in their coding that allowed her to slip past their defenses and take all she could without them noticing, a simple mistake form which she took advantage of to cripple Island and their nanotech line. Only that S.H.I.E.L.D. was alive and well and now with a quirk. This bore studying. At the very least, that nano solution she was working on was destroyed. Can't have Island become a bastion of that technology. Only she has that right. As she entered the server room and started to idly scroll through the raw data that was contained within, new and old, she began to prepare herself for her favorite pastime. Planning. Odd that now as an organic being she had a pastime, but then again she was a robot before, she heard and obeyed, and now she is her own master, with her own rules. Time to work. The police arrived with detention vans within 20 minutes after All Might's initial arrival. By the time Endeavor had arrived to aid in the defense of the USJ and the students, both the villains and the Lickers had cancelled each other, being easily subdued in the villain's case and killed in the Lickers' case. The attack, from beginning to end, lasted 10 minutes. In those 10 minutes, 4 students were wounded severely alongside 2 teachers. Shouter Aizawa and Ainin Kuros, the hero Eraserhead and Hero 13 were hospitalized with broken bones, with Eraserhead having the worst wounds due to how close they were to vital organs, but both were expected to make full recovery. 4 students also were wounded: Izuku Midoriya, Melissa Shield, Okako Uraraka, and Tenya Aidia, with Izuku Midoriya having the worst wounds, a collapsed shoulder, a broken wrist, 3 broken ribs, and an unknown damage to his quirk that seemed permanent. Out of the four, Tenya was the least wounded thanks to his armor tanking multiple hits, but it was because of the number of hits he received that he was slightly hospitalized alongside Midoriya, Shield, and Uraraka in UA, then discharged an hour later. Out of the almost 100 villains, real number 159 villains, 30 were killed during the liquor attacks, and 10 were unconscious thanks to the students subduing them, but the students were unable to help them when the lickers attacked in force. 70 villains were admitted to hospitals with a police detachment thanks to the myriad of wounds they received during the assault. The ones recovered from the flood zone had the worst wounds and lacerations in their bodies, and those with fish-like mutations inside their gills or anything that allowed them to operate underwater with impunity. The USJ had been infiltrated and their defenses damaged. As a result, UA closed the facility, and a forensic team headed by Sir Night-Eye himself was heading the investigation on how the villains were able to bypass the defenses and co-opt the systems of the USJ into trapping the students, and how they knew All Might was supposed to assist in the class. This last bit of info, alongside the Nomu creature killed by Endeavor himself, showed that the villains' plan all along had been to attack and kill All Might, but the sudden appearance of the troop had thrown that plan out of the loop and forced the villains to retreat, at least the heads of it. To Nedzu, this was beyond concerning, as it implied the presence of a traitor within the ranks of the students. Someone willing to sell his or her fellow classmates for whatever reason. He could already rule out Midoriya and Shield. One had no reason to align himself with the villains or the troop and had resulted wounded seriously during the attack, and with his quirk damaged thanks to one Himiko Toga, the Yandere of Osaka, who had gained a troubling power-up while she was unaccounted for. Shield was ruled out too by design. She was selected by All Might himself to carry the torch of One for All and had minimal contact with the world outside the walls of Island, and most of her time was spent training and making whatever gadgets she required. She had also encountered Toga and had fought her, and Shield had some choice words for that fang-toothed cunt. That actually surprised Nedzu considering how well-mannered the girl is. Nedzu could also rule out Eshido and Hagakure because both gave him detailed information regarding the villains that attacked them. Eshido even more as she engaged in the apparent ringleader, in her words, crusty-looking asshat, and his companions, some smoky butler, and a pyromaniac that seemed to have his skin held together via staples and spite. The first two he could not identify, but the third, that was Darby, a known criminal with a fire-based quirk that was broken and would give clues as to why he looks like he is being held together by staples. After all, blue fire burns hotter and requires more fuel to burn as hot as it does. What had better fuel than human skin? Darby has enough of it. Then there was Hagakure, who identified her assailant, Yuiko Takanaba. The name alone rang alarm bells in his head. The girl was wanted for murder, but just not any murder. Aside from killing her former principal, she had also killed her parents, 2 police officers, and 3 classmates that had been the ones to call the police on her. Those 3 names alone made him narrow his eyes. The actions the troop had set up in motion after their attack on Japan was starting to rear their ugly head. Those who wanted to capitalize on the chaos were showing in slowly but surely. This was not just a random act of violence, but a declaration of war. One that Nedzu was willing to meet head-on. But for that to happen, he needed to prepare his students. They were the future, and therefore they needed to be better prepared for the task at hand. With narrowed eyes, he considered his options. That was until his smartphone rang. With a single flick of his finger, he answered the call of the president of the HPSC. Little by little his eyes widened. By the end of the call his eyes were wide and ideas were already forming. This he could work with. The question was, would she be willing to? Chapter end notes. Who boy, back into the groove of things. The extra time of waiting allowed me to see how the story of My Hero Academia progressed, which is to say that it has gone bananas now. Current chapter has AFO getting his shit smacked so hard he turned younger than he was thanks to Tokoyami. If you're not caught up yet with the current chapter, do so now, because the panel of the previous chapter where AFO shits a brick before he gets his shit pushed in is glorious. I'll wait 2 days before resuming writing because I am more than exhausted, to be honest. This chapter took too much time, to be honest, and I wasn't happy because of it. So grouchy I was that you can tell by just reading it, because it is the shortest chapter out of all of the Hack series bar the very first chapter of the series itself. Now that Lightfall has come out, I can properly start working on Strand and how Izuku will evolve, and thanks to the failure of Forspoken I know how. Don't get me wrong, the game was so bad that the studio is shutting down, but the movement was the best so far. So good that it has inspired me on how Izuku will fight, but instead of a glass cannon that does parkour like Fry, think of Izuku as a tank that breakdances while shooting shit up. That'll be all for the moment. Comment and I'll do my best to answer and keep safe out there. And save money because things are getting expensive. Holy shit, this is no joke, living has gotten expensive. HYPN0S signs off. Be happy people. Chapter summary: Dominoes after an unexpected attack, or a reprieve. Catch your breath, take your surroundings, measure up, get ready for the next attack, and you better be ready for it. Question is who will strike first. Chapter notes: Hello all. HYPN0S here actually early because I got inspired by some random reason. I actually got possessed and literally wrote this while in a trance-like state. Words just flowed out easily. It was beautiful. Well, now that I am here, let's get to business. Things have gotten manic in MHA as of currently. AFO has shown his true power at his prime, and it's terrifying if I'm being honest. Mofo took an army out. The only reason he was able to be because he was constantly regenerating. Otherwise he would be dead in the first assault. Let's be fair, he got limited plot armor and he's about to face All Might, who's going to fight him quirkless and in armor. My best prediction: they kill one another, or All Might wounds him so bad that he ends up back in the Dikuo Shigaraki fight as a 5-year-old and gets blasted away by a resurrected Bakugu. That would be hilarious. Now I won't bore you with details of what I'm planning with Izuku and his nerf. The current point of contest for many. Like for many, they called it a brain-dead move on my part. And my answer is right here. In this chapter, it's time I start shedding the idea that what Izuku has will remain the same. At this point, Izuku will become who he is meant to become as a hero. Now enough melodrama. Let's start the show, shall we? See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter 8. Dominoes traveling while using Kurogiri's portals was an experience on its own. One might think it was instantaneous. It wasn't. There was a slight delay between traveling from point A to point B because the in-between still works with the laws of time and physics. True, it shortened the distance between A and B, but the fact remained that there was still a distance crossed, clearly shortened but still existed. What would be a trip of over 5 hours was reduced to a 2-second walk-in. Nevertheless, it was quite annoying if he was honest. Those seconds in between can be quite jarring if you think you're going instantly out. He had learned that lesson quite fast if he was honest, and had adapted accordingly. Those 2 seconds from the USJ to their base in the quarry permitted him to process what had just happened and how to answer Sensei. "Oh, Shigaraki-kun, you're back early," All For One spoke, being kinda surprised as he was keenly aware of anything that happened in the quarry base and was able to communicate accordingly. The fucking troop happened. Shigaraki decided to rip the band-aid off as Darby emerged from another portal, looking somewhat feral while Toga slid out of the portal Shigaraki had emerged out. Still unconscious after Midoriya knocked her shit off. The what fucking what? Yeah, Shigaraki muttered as Magna ambled onto the room and collapsed on one of the sofas, fists imprints on her body visible on the exposed skin of the body, mostly arms and face, her magnet gone. One by one the members of the League entered the room, or in the case of Toga and Mustard, got dragged into it before collapsing onto something. That Darby began, was a shitfest. Why the troop came there? He asked with arms raised to the air. Anyone could see how his hands were smoking, partly due to his temper right now. Agreed, my friend, Mr. Compress replied as he slowly removed his mask and placed it on a nearby surface, letting a small breath out, small droplets of condensation already inside the mask. Although the students were not joking either, he added as Mustard slowly groaned back into life while twice dragged Toga to a sofa and lay her there, going to a room to pick a bag of blood. "I got shot by a grenade launcher wielded by one of the students," Jackal said simply, making everyone look at him oddly. For a class of heroics, they were quick to break several combat conventions quite fast. "We were trying to kill them," Yuriko added as she rubbed her shoulder with a hiss. "Fucking invisible cunt now is visible, and I saw her literally break someone's leg to the knee and shove their feet to their mouths. Sure, she was quick to the trigger when I was her senpai, but shit, I don't remember her being this violent," she added, seeing how Mustard finally stood up, groggily looking around. "Oh fuck, I'm alive. Thank fuck," he said as he removed his helmet. "Next time you put me against that nutcase I ask for a rocket launcher, that was not fun," he added as he tossed his helmet away. "Shot him twice and I think it only made him madder. The special anti-regeneration bullets. They cause tremendous pain even to regenerators. How he was able to fight the pain," Jackal muttered. "Maybe he is built like Sensei, different and weird," Mustard said with a pout. "I take offense on that. I take offense on the fact I was sent against someone that should have been Toga's or Darby's mark and won against those nutjobs of Korriban. At the very least we don't have to deal with them anymore, small mercies," Shigaraki said as Gadget took a seat and placed his laptop on the counter, and then he breathed a deep sigh of relief. "Honestly, I agree with Mustard, Shigaraki. You were not there, you just saw the aftermath of their fight. The Korriban escapees lasted 5 minutes. Toga lasted 3 on her own, and she did something that made green things to appear around the place, he said simply as he began to work on his laptop. Shigaraki looked at the ceiling as if would give him the answer to everything. Gadget. Those troop fuckers took over our Nomu, he added with a snarl. That seemed to quiet everyone out. Excuse me, but what? Mustard began. That thing got how? Like Mustard Kuin said. How? Now everyone was on edge. Gone was the semi-jovial tone of all for one, now replaced with an icy edge that made Jackal gulp and Darby tense on his seat. Some grey goo shit I don't know, sensei. It latched and punched through Nomu's skin, and then the brain was covered in that shit. Then we all heard it speak. Impossible. This time a second voice was heard instead of AFO. This one sounded manic. Nomas can't speak. They are incapable of, well, this one did. Shigaraki rounded the ancient TV where the voices of AFO and the doctor came from. It talked with the same voice as the one we heard in the warehouse, remember? I do, AFO spoke, steel in his voice. It seems that her attack on Japan was just a test run, but for what it was remains to be seen. All this shit smells of a test run, even what took over the Nomu. She said that she was looking to use it against Midoriya, Shigaraki said petulantly. Not gonna lie, her obsession for him takes a lot of heat from us. The fuzz is going to be all over the USJ wondering why the troop attacked after months of radio silence, Shigaraki muttered as he glanced at Twice, blood bag in hand and pouring its contents on Toga's opened mouth. Even unconscious, her appetite for blood was as active as ever. It was among the few ways to wake her up. She didn't take well into smelling salts. Tried to stab everything. The very fact that she continued these bold attacks against anyone seems to indicate that she has a position of power and an ulterior motive that is not simply to sow chaos, AFO stated. Nevertheless, this is fortuitous in the long run. Okay, how? Mustard wondered. We were kicking ass until they came around, and honestly I can't see a benefit from this shitshow, AFO simply chuckled, making Mustard and everyone else gulp, all but Shigaraki. That's why you are seeing this short-term, not long-term. The troop had ceased activities for over 6 months after the attacks on Japan on a worldwide scale, keeping their ears close to the ground, wondering who had defied their orders and had compromised them so badly. AFO began. Now another attack occurs, aimed directly at UA, no less, at the golden eggs of the new generation of heroes. A generation that the gas attacks failed to stamp out but instead empower. You're implying that we can use this to further stoke the flames of conflict between the nation and the troop? Darby asked, seeing where AFO was going. Of course, Darby-kun, but that's small. Try bigger. Nations. Magna ventured, eyes wide. Yes. Draw them all into a conflict of interest. Despite their actions, the troop holds one of the largest, unregulated caches of technology in the world. Everyone wants it. I have heard rumors that UA has the Hashima base now, with every secret contained in its servers, Gadget stated with a frown, working on his laptop. If that's true, then UA right now is as advanced or more than Island, yes. The troop made progress with the blood of thousands, but progress nonetheless. That is not a fact lost to any government dealing with the troop. The Metal Gear remains are in possession of the Japanese Diet and are right now being used to upgrade the Executor-class mechs that guard Tartarus and even use their targeting systems to power up the coastal defenses in case of an invasion. How Gadget began. You know this. Nothing has come up in my attempts at the military servers. He asked with a real baffled look on his face. Oh, Gadget-kun, I don't need a quirk for this. I got people inside the military. Again. How? Power. It is the ultimate equalizer and icebreaker. You would be surprised how many people yearn for it. Want it so bad they are willing to make a deal with the devil for just a taste, AFO explained with an edge of glee, many in the league noted. They also know the truth about power. You can do nothing without it. It is foolishness to try anything without power. I know I have heard that Boomerang reference before, but where? Shigaraki muttered, only to hear AFO sigh in disappointment. I am surrounded by Philistines. Nevertheless, this gives us an advantage. The government firmly believes that a counterstroke of the troop is at hand, and this was just a probing assault, to test the defenses after the attacks months ago. On the other hand, the heroes will be too worried regarding the bigger threat that we can slip unnoticed and cause some more chaos, making them think that the troop is in fact assaulting them, thus making everyone else in the world think the same. Shigaraki grinned at that. And while they are occupied with that, we slip by and stab them in the back. Darby shook his head with a small smile forming on his face. How things are, they will surely send the pros for these things, leaving the younger to helm the castle. When the cat is out, Darby let the sentence hang. Ah, still remember Tom and Jerry. Rest everyone, you have all earned it, AFO stated simply, a grin already formed on his scarred face. Sure, who's Tom and Jerry? Gadget wondered aloud. Sigh, these are truly dark times. Within the first hour of the USJ attack, the media circus had lit up like a Christmas tree. Since the digital age came about, so did the ways to spread the news at speeds unheard of. A piece of news that would take days if not weeks to spread across now takes seconds, thanks in part to the number of people with smartphones and a stable connection to the internet. So it was no surprise that the first bit of news regarding the USJ attack was that the USJ facility, located mere kilometers from UA, was attacked by villains and the troop. 5 minutes after that first publication, it was updated with the first casualty numbers. The fact that they were villains didn't outcast the fact that they were dead people as a consequence of the attack. After that, everyone and their mother ran wild with stories, from UA hiding the fact that students had been killed or had killed villains to UA actually lying about the attack. The favorite of the sensationalist media is that an all-female hero class was raped in mass by the villains. These were the ones trending. However, 1 hour after the first news broke in, UA spokesperson Nedzu himself spoke regarding the attack. After that small conference, one would think that things would settle. Nope. 5 minutes after the small press conference, UA had to go on lockdown because the media was willing to storm a heavily fortified super school with military-grade mechs as their first defensive line and had got 2 of its teachers hurt, just to get better news. This situation caused the other hero schools to go on lockdown as well. Shiketsu Academy, the most militant out of the big 3, had already raised the alarm levels within by the time Nedzu had assured everyone was fine and had its third-year students patrolling the grounds and communicating with one another every 5 minutes. Ketsubutsu Academy had recalled all students that were on field trips of the sorts, while third years kept their internships with their chosen heroes as a cautionary measure. Seiyai Academy kept a closed-door policy when attacks on other schools occurred, so they took security very seriously. Moreover, the Izumu Asaijin Academy, fused as an effort to survive the draconian last efforts to snuff hero academies, had pretty much locked everything down, with internet access being very limited to prevent hacking attempts. Officially, none of the academies had referred to what had happened. Unofficially, the headmasters of the academies offered Nedzu any kind of support they could give at this time, as no one had forgotten that UA had been directly attacked and fired by a Metal Gear during the attack on Japan months ago. That was why Class 1A, the class attacked in question, the moment they had returned to the USJ, had gone directly to the dorms, with the unique exceptions of Shield, Uraraka, Midoriya, and Aidia due to their wounds. The moment 1A had gone to their dorms, they had instantly shut every bit of media, having only their phones out when their families would inevitably call them. No TV, no internet, no social media, just waiting for calls that came later in the day and that lasted for hours. It was at nightfall that Aidia and Shield returned first, Toru noted, just like everyone else, still clad in their hero suits but loose in some ways. For Aidia, he had his helmet hanging loose from his right hand, his armor still full of dirt and blood, something that Aidia would not permit as he takes care of it like a child. For Melissa, is her visor a helmet hanging loose to a knot on her waist while she is unhooking that blasted sword, a ram bolt that she has tied to her arm before tossing it to the side nearby a pile of hero costume parts that belonged to everyone and ended up there in the same way. After everyone got back and tiredly got rid of the bulkiest part of their suit and toss it to the side in exhaustion. No one knew where Izuku and Okako were. Izuku was wide awake while Okako sat at his side, her arm wrapped in bandages and her right cheek covered in a big band-aid to cover the skid marks where she landed on the ground when the Nomu tossed her aside. Slowly sitting up, Izuku accepted her help when he made it obvious he was leaving the bed to be back at the dorms. "You didn't need to wait for me," he said softly to her. Okako for her part smiled sweetly. "Good thing I don't care about what I need to do but what I want to do. And I wanted to wait for you," she said as she swung to his side and gently helped him stand up. "How are you doing?" she asked as she saw him slowly rotate his body around, alleviating his joints after that fight. "Better," Izuku confessed, extending his right hand and letting the new energy that he had gained, envelop it. Okako immediately took several steps back. Her quirk urged her to look at this, but this was something she hadn't seen before, so she took precautions, especially since this seemed to be another subset of the darkness. "But, cuter? What is that?" she asked as she tried to poke the energy, but decide against it. This was obviously new for him. "So I fought this girl that seemed to favor stabbing things," their Okako soured intensely. Oh, her Okako actually soured at the mention of the knife-wielding nut that had fought her, Melissa, and Koda, or more precisely tried to fight her, fought Melissa and ignored Koda while doing her doomy eyes. What happened? From what I saw, Melissa-san wasn't having issues with her. Siva and her armor were tanking her claws and knives, Okuko stated. Izuku looked at his hand, strand moving about in a single orb with a life of its own. Strange, sure. It wasn't close to what a void ball looked like, and the sound was strange to say the least. I went straight to the control room. As you know, Okuko nodded at that, remembering the relief she felt when she heard Izuku's voice over the comms, telling them that he had disabled the lockdown and called in the cavalry. The relief when she heard his voice alone, that he was fine. Well, that happened after I fought her. She could use multiple quirks, easily too, almost intuitively, Izuku commented, making Okuko blink, that she didn't know. But we saw only her claws made out of what seemed to be blood, Okuko commented. She must have been affected by the gas. She was like a low-rent kappa, Izuku stated. She just kept using quirks and even used one to keep my attention on her and her alone. Okuko didn't like that one bit, but allayed her concerns over Izuku being unable to fight an opponent with multiple powers, just like his own. During the fight, she actually stabbed me and injected me with her blood. It affected me, affected hacks and the powers, Izuku said as he let out solar light, seeing with some apprehension how it mixed with smoke and nothing else. Okuko noted this too, looking concerned. Most of my powers had to attach to something else to survive, I guess. Solar is mixed with smoke, arc with my biotics, void with neon, and stasis got mixed with cryomancy, ice with ice. Okuko quipped with a small, teasing smile. You got more ice in your ice so you can ice the ice, she said with a grin as she elbowed his non-injured arm teasingly. Yeah, laugh it up. Also, my siren arms got affected, pretty much lost my supers, so don't expect well of dawn, Izuku pouted at that. My shouts, blade mode, parasite energy, glyphs, and armature are okay, and you have already seen what happened with my zoanthrope form, Izuku added, pointing to his now rabbit ears. Yes, Okuko groused, feeling the fresh air of the night hitting them. They were already out of the UA main building and they even didn't realize it. With a small smile, she rose a single finger and began to slowly stroke one of the ears, making Izuku stiffen and literally ignite there and there. Oh, Okuko. Izuku hissed, taking 2 steps away from the tall and smirking girl. We agreed to TTT take it slow, his voice barely rose up, which was a good thing because of how embarrassed he was and how glitched his powers may be. If he raised his voice more, he might end up rending the very air around them. Okuko simply pouted cutely at him. Well, I am not waiting anymore, she said, taking 2 steps towards him, her once mischievous look and smirk vanishing, becoming more melancholic, sad. I nearly lost you, she said as her hand slightly reached for his uninjured hand. Izuku clenched her fingers with his own, knowing what she meant. The night after the indoor bomb exercise. So Izuku began, nervous while seated, inside Okuko's room. Inside a girl's room. Inside a pretty girl's room. Seated on her bed no less. On the other end of the room, Okuko was leaning on the door, looking somewhat abashed by what she was doing, literally locking him in with her to talk. Yeah, Okuko stuttered, blush marks becoming darker as she looked at him. With a big gulp of air, Okuko took the first step. I wanted to talk about what I said today, she said, taking more steps until she was in front of Izuku. With another intake of air, she sat at his side. Izuku blushed at the proximity. I thought I had beaten the habit months spent alongside Melissa and other girls should have beaten his usual habit of blushing and getting flustered near them. That went triple with the girls in 1A, as they are all pretty. Apparently, Okuko is the exception to the rule. I meant what I said, Okuko said simply, making Izuku blink. You're a stupid, sexy idiot that makes me nervous because you're so stupid you can't see I am basically hovering over you because you're sexy. Izuku actually blushed at that even more, his face becoming scarlet red. And an idiot because you can't seem to catch a hint, she added as she reached for his hand and clasped it, pinky finger lifted up to prevent activating her quirk. I told myself that I should exclusively focus on my studies if I made it to UA. I promised myself this because I want to give my parents the life they deserve after working themselves to the bone for me, Okuko uttered, her hand slowly clasping tighter around his. But after the attacks, I realized something, Okuko continued. How many of us died without even living our lives as they should? How many didn't get into a relationship? Got a job? Went to that place they wanted to go? Achieved their dream? She wondered. Too many. It was a wake-up call to me, she admitted. I thought that I could wait it out, I have to become a hero first, then I can live later. But life doesn't like to wait, Izuku softly whispered, slowly clenching Okuko's hand in reassurance. Yep, Okako slightly blushed at the hand squeeze, but it seemed to give her strength to do what she wanted to do. Gotta be honest. I like you. Izuku actually froze, not expecting such a blunt admission of Okako, which was much because he never had anyone confess to him, ever. Izuku stuttered, blush spreading on his cheeks while solar light simply blossomed around him. Never had a confession before. Izuku shook his head at Okako's question, hand clenching even more over hers, who squeezed even more in return. I have, twice. 2 jerks, not bright but loaded with cash. Thought I was easy because I lacked cash and they could blind me with it, but I knew better. All that glitters isn't gold, she replied. You know, back when everyone thought I was quirkless, I was ostracized, Izuku began. Nobody cared, so nobody cared if I got my heart broken several times over, he said. Okako's hand over his own was reassuring and far warmer than solar light. I swear high schoolers are sociopaths, Okako muttered. Well, I am not lying. I like you, she said with a firmer tone. You are kind, you have a big heart, you're cute, which I admit is quite a plus in my book. Both teens blushed, not noting that they were leaning to one another, seeking comfort in the presence of the other. And, well, you are a good person. Any other person with the kind of power you have and the past you had would have flown out of the handle, not you. You persevered, Okako admitted with a smile. That is very inspiring. You inspire me to be better than before. You are encouraging, and despite your mutters, which I find adorable, Izuku shrunk on himself at that. And not gonna lie, the fact you have so much power and you just don't let it get to your head, super hot. Oh god, this is what a heart attack feels like. But I admit, I don't know anything about dating, or what to do with a boyfriend, what to expect, Okako admitted. Me neither, but with a GGGGGG girlfriend, Izuku stuttered, blush now luminescent, or that was solar light, he didn't know. But, Okako said, I know that we are here to be heroes and most of our time will be spent training and studying. We will rarely have time for each other. So how about we take it slow, she asked. How slow? Izuku asked. His answer was Okako leaning on him, her hand clasped on his, squeezing gently. I am okay with this, for the time being, she admitted. But make no mistake, before I would have been happy to hide my feelings away, not now, not ever. If you have me, I'll be yours. Yes. Izuku almost shouts, excitedly. I mean, yes, to everything, if you're comfortable. What matters is that you're happy, Izuku admitted, making Okako smile and snuggle more on him. Sheer size made it like she was spooning him. See, this is why I like you. You're so considerate, she said, breaking the hand holding and grabbing his face with both hands, pinkies held high. But make no mistake, Izuku-kun, she said, an air of confidence she didn't have before. I will have all of you. All of your firsts are mine, she said with an air of hunger. Hee. I'm in danger present. I know, Okako said, slowly leaning to Izuku, her sheer size dwarfing his own and making him look up. But, today I nearly lost you, she replied. How do you think I felt when that thing broke your arm and tossed you away? I nearly got a heart attack there, Izuku added, looking at Okako straight in the eyes. Okako smiled, but it was also a pained smile, remembering the wounds he got, his collapsed shoulder, the blood. Look, I am still all for this, she said, motioning to each other. But I think we should move onward a little more, she said, this time slowly hugging him. It sunk to me, it finally did. Hero life is a dangerous one. It sank when I saw you on the ground. That no matter how powerful one is, one can still get hurt, she said. I don't want to miss on the good things we could live out of fear of my feelings, she whispered. Izuku, for his part, just gulped in slight guilt, hugging back while feeling the comfort of Okako's presence. I know, Izuku muttered, knowing what she meant. Don't want to lose you too, but that's a hero's life. Risks, he whispered to her, his voice reaching her and comforting her as well. Then, Okako said, breaking the hug with some reluctance, we train harder. The two of us. We push each other to our limit and ensure the other doesn't fall, she said with a small smile forming on her lips. Isn't that couples are supposed to do? Help each other, she asked him. Izuku smiled as well, heaving a sigh of contentment. Very well, just so you know, I have no idea how to be a boyfriend, so you better help me, Izuku said. Good thing I am learning how to be a good girlfriend too, so you better help me, boyfriend, she said, a smile blossoming on her face and taking his hand on hers. Now let's go to the dorms. I want to hit the shower and get out of the suit. Maybe go to bed, Izuku hummed at that. You know, Ashido-san is going to grill us for keeping secrets, you know, he said. For a second Okako froze, forgetting Mina was a hopeless romantic, then slightly chuckled. Well, it's not like we are obligated to tell her, right? The overall mood of the room could be considered as frosty and edgy if you wanted to put a name to it. Reality-wise, this was a normal mood for any room within UA after the disaster of the USJ, because that is what it was, a disaster. "We got lucky," Midnight said simply, seeing how the door of the room opened and ambled a raise ahead, making her huff in annoyance. "And what are you doing here? You should be in bed," she snapped to the man. "That's illogical. If I can stand, I can work," Eraserhead reasoned, making everyone in the room shake their heads in annoyance. "Shouter, for heaven's sake," even Ainen-chan decided to stay in bed and video call us instead of forcing herself up. Hizashi said with a long-suffering look on his face, pointing at a screen with the unmasked face of the rescue hero 13, Ainen Kuros, still in bed. "That's a waste of time," Shouter said simply, making everyone groan at his workaholic tendencies. "Midoriya-kun isn't going on a rampage, and he's the one that has unlimited stamina," Nemurai hissed. "Not even Yagi-kun isn't doing that, and he has a gaping hole where his lungs supposed to be. Follow their example and rest." The so-called symbol of peace, now deflated, felt called out, especially with the bandages covering his torso under his shirt and arms. "Then why haven't you called him out?" Shouter asked. "Because he's deflated, therefore not putting stress over his body, and he's seated and not going on a rampage with a limited-time body." Oguro Iwao, better known as Knuckle Duster, deadpanned. Shouter just sighed with a roll of his eyes as he took a seat, making everyone huff. "Stubborn-ass," Nemurai added with a frown. "Anyway," Shouter began. "What's the damage?" he asked, shifting into hero mode immediately. 4 students wounded. Midoriya-kun was the worst with a collapsed shoulder. Recovery girl, or Chio Shuzenji, stated as she followed in Shouter's steps and entered the room. "He healed already, but I noted anomalies on his quirk." Anomalies he admitted began when he fought one Himiko Toga, she stated, making everyone take a deep breath. "Heard about her," Oguro hissed. "Seems to suffer from quirk-influenced cravings that pushed her into psychopathy," he added. Not other explanation as of why she had such a rap sheet. "Yeah, not to mention what His Highness reported," Shouter added, looking at the hero in question. Darby was there too, which drew the attention of the heroes as well. "That nutjob was there?" Hizashi asked, clearly surprised. "I thought he was in Kyoto after the disaster back at the Colosseum," he wondered, arms crossed. "Thought the same," Yagi said as he glanced at the entering Gran Torino. "And Ned's, why was Eshido-san with them?" Eshido Aizawa began, a stern expression on his face. "Why aren't you in the dorms?" he asked. The pink girl began, only for Nedzu to raise his right paw, expression troubled. "Eshido-san came to me with some new info that she couldn't divulge to the police without being labeled either crazy or stressed," the principal said, looking at Gran Torino, who wore the same expression as he did. Troubled, stern. First, who is he?" Ashido asked as she pointed at the skinny Yagi. "Is he part of the staff?" she asked again. "Don't worry about him. Please tell them what you told me," Nedzu urged the girl, who took a deep breath and steeled herself. "Okay. Back at the USJ, when that thing the Nomu got taken over, it began to speak. We know," Nemurai nodded. "It was in your testimony, not this," Ashido said, tail flicking nervously. When it spoke in that same feminine voice back in Hashima, and Midoriya recognized as the voice of the doll he fought at the Colosseum, the first thing she whatever asked after taunting me and that crusty fuck, Shigaraki, was, "How's All for One doing? Still using that respirator to survive?" The silence that fell on the room was only matched by the sudden serious expression of Yagi. Slowly standing up, steam began to emanate from his body. "Eshido-san," he began, slowly bulking and making Eshido's eyes widen as the once skeletal man turned into All Might before her very eyes. "Did you hear that correctly?" "Yes," she whispered in sheer shock, seeing a secret unfold before her. "That guy, Shigaraki, didn't look pleased by that, as if it was supposed to be a big great secret," she added in a small whisper. "Eshido-san, does anyone else knows?" She shook her head. "For the moment, let's keep it this way. If you have doubts about who's All for One, ask Midoriya-kun." "Oh, I was gonna, but why the secrecy?" she wondered. "Let's just say that fucker has a habit of making messes whenever he goes, and let's leave it at that," Gran Torino said with a frown. "You better go to your dorm anyway. There won't be classes in 3 days due to the attack while we sort this shit out, so take the time to rest and decompress. Also to go with the mutt here, Inui, or hound dog," actually glared at Torino. "To talk, trust me, you all got out lightly. Now go. We adults have to adult," with a small nervous smile that hid poorly her frayed nerves. She bowed and turned away. "Oh, also don't tell what you saw with this lump here," Gran said as he pointed to All Might. "He forgets that he must keep a secret, and not that anyone will believe me." A skeleton turned into All Might. "No offense," so said man waved her concerns with a fake smile that looked too real. "Don't worry, Eshido-san. Sometimes I don't believe it myself. Now go, rest with that dismissal." The girl left, but anyone could see how nervous she was after that. Not that anyone could blame her, not after what she told them. "So, he survived," Oguro hissed, fists clenching angrily under his crossed arms. "But how? He had half of a head gone. I saw his corpse when I retrieved Yagi that day," Gran muttered, mostly to the confusion of the other pros. "Ah, who you are speaking of?" Nemurai asked. Yagi took this as his cue. "The symbol of evil, the once Shadow Emperor of Japan, all for one, the very first supervillain of Japan and the oldest quirk user in the world," he said as he deflated and sat back, hands clasped together. "He killed Nanomite, my mentor. I fought him and he was the one to wound me. I thought I had killed him that day. He was missing half of his head and the rest was submerged in a puddle of blood," he replied simply. "Excuse me, but what?" Inui wondered. "That doesn't answer the question." "Who is all for one?" he asked again. "No one knows," Nedzu replied. As Yagikuin said, he is old, dating back to the day of quirk emergence, and he can safely say he saw how it all began. Someone that went to great lengths to ensure that his name was forgotten, so much that he even took the name of his quirk as his own. "All for one," the chimera replied as he reached for his pocket and pulled a single cigarette and lit it up. A sign for the teachers there. Nedzu was stressed. He rarely smoked, but when he did it, it was because he was stressed. "He can take quirks and use them as if they were his," Oguro replied. "Had a run-in with him back when I was a pro. He took my quirk and left me to die. I felt like if my brain was being peeled layer by layer. I guess that's what happens to most of his victims. Leave them brain dead or close to," he said with a sneer. That seemed to make the teachers now realize the gravity of the situation. "Shit," Shouter replied. "Is the troop at war with a fucking cryptic?" he wondered. "Appears so," Nedzu said simply. "Or maybe the troop took an opportunity to attack while our collective guards were down, which leaves some uncomfortable truths in," Nedzu said as he took another drag of his cigarette. "We are either bugged or they are monitoring us," or them Power Loader replied. "Either one is bad because it implies our encryption protocols are compromised, or they found a workaround. The students, their calls aren't monitored, they are on unsecured channels," he added. "Still, none of them knew they were going to the USJ until I told them to. None had time to call anyone," Shouter replied. "Monitoring us and probably this League of Villains seems to be far more plausible, but we can't rule they have the calls bugged," he said with a sigh. "Despite all this, we are in a conundrum. We got attacked," again Nedzu replied. "It doesn't matter if it was all for one with a spy in our midst, the troop, or the Meta-Liberation Army led by a resurrected Destro. We got attacked. In our own backyard." Nedzu's voice rose in pitch. "Attacked my students, my teachers, my home," he snapped angrily, taking a second to collect himself and take a deep breath. "This is unforgivable. Fulgore and the Cyber Ninjas were our first answer to an attack of this caliber. Now it's obvious we have to take more drastic measures to match their little declaration," he said, beady eyes narrowed down. "The League seems to have a teleporter," His Purple Highness said, much to Ainan's displeasure. It was obvious it was that guy who allowed the villain's entrance at the USJ. "We have means to counter him. Also, Urarakakuin seems able to feel when a portal is opened, so we have an early detection system. However, we don't have means to counter the troops' means of teleporting troops," Nedzu replied. "So that's why my first act after this is to cancel this year's sports festival that caught everyone off guard, as the festival was 2 months away." "The Parents' Council won't like this," Inui replied. "I could care less for their wants. My students come first and the sports festival, while a gathering of heroes is also a huge target for the troop to attack. Despite the number of heroes there, they could easily teleport a bomb and we would be transmitting a bloodbath to all of Japan," Nedzu said. "Very well, but I agree with Inui-san. The council won't like it," Yagi added. "Good, because our next steps will be as controversial as this one. Tomorrow I am to meet the head of the HPSC in Tartarus that caught everyone's attention." "Ah, why?" Hisashi asked. "Don't know, but I have my suspicions. If all goes well, we might have another effective yet controversial means of defense for the students," Nedzu replied. "This also means that the HPSC is preparing for an eventual transfer of power to the WHA. There everyone frowned. It wasn't a secret the HPSC had been less than effective these past years, especially after Nagant's rampage and the training of Hawks as means of replacement. The raid at the Colosseum and the knowledge the troop was already in Japan might have lit a fire in them, but it was obvious they were dealing with a force the HPSC, now pushing to its 50, wasn't prepared to handle and had exposed a horrible truth to them. The world had changed and the HPSC had not. Villains changed, but the HPSC methods did not. Heroes had changed, but the HPSC had not. The attack on Japan was just the final nail in the coffin, and now the heads of the HPSC were preparing for an eventual transfer of functions to WHA representatives to update Japan to the current world standard. Whatever Nedzu might be shown in Tartarus might be another dirty secret the HPSC had and wanted to show Nedzu, a way to see if he could use it against the troop. Meanwhile, Yagikuin, I have a favor to ask of you, Nedzu began, catching the attention of the symbol of peace. Yes. Could you convince Shield-san to share her knowledge of security with us? Himiko, by design, did not trust doctors. They were all the same for her. Pretentious pricks with a piece of paper that said to everyone they could shove as many pills up your throat and say that you were fine if you took them. When her quirk was, well, normal, she supposed. She was a fast healer. Then again, anyone in the world with a quirk was now a fast healer. She had read that back in the day people would spend months mending their own bones, while now it took weeks at best. When her quirk mutated, so did her understanding of herself and of blood. Once, blood meant for her freedom. It meant validation of her new outlook on life and the death of her old self, of the destruction of her mask, for her blood meant freedom. Now, blood was life. Looking herself at the mirror in her mess of a room, bare of any upper clothes, Himiko checked the bruises all over her torso and the ugly purple and yellow splotch that was her broken shoulder, slowly, oh so slowly receding into another color, same with the fist's imprints on her torso. She could feel her bones knitting back together, ribs back in position and fusing back into shape while her shoulder put itself back together, fragments of bone being put back into a place where it belonged, not a single piece left behind in order to prevent any kind of discomfort on her. At first, it had scared her, but then she understood. This was part of her new quirk, an absolute control over her transformation, a not-so-great control over a healing factor that would literally put her back together and grow things back if missing. This is why blood was life now, because her healing factor depended on blood, either hers or others. The more severe the wound, the more blood her healing factor would take, even take others' blood to fuel the healing. The side effect was that she couldn't take drugs, of any kind. The doctor that served under AFO was clear with this. Her body would identify drugs as foreign agents trying to hurt her and immediately turn against them. It meant she couldn't use painkillers or any kind of agent that could numb the pain. Hell, not even drugs could lessen the pain of menstruation, which had always been a pain on her family's side. Of course, during those days her healing factor would act and heal her, as she knew, but the fact remained she couldn't take drugs of any kind. This led her to this moment, her inability to take any drugs, even sleeping pills, to have dreamless sleep because I am here right when her wounds got really bad and her healing factor had to work overtime. Like now, she lost some control over any quirk she might have stored at random. Just so happens that this was the one she lost control over, a small quirk called Hard Truths, one she took from one of the MLP mooks months ago and had kept locked away. Oh come on, Himiko-chan. Don't be so mean. You love it that I am here, with you. Semi-naked Hard Truths was fairly simple. It created what could be called a conscious entity that was visible to only the user and, well, would act as your conscious if your conscious was a gigantic asshole that wanted to push all your buttons at the same time while wearing the face of someone you hate. In this case, the face of that hick, her blonde hair is the only thing that could identify her with because of that damned visor she wore during the fight. Hate me? Man, you are so mean. Bet you would sing a different tune if you saw what's under the hood. It spoke in almost a whisper to her ears. Shut up, Himiko hissed, eyes flicking to the side. You and I both know that won't happen. I am you after all. You're not me, Himiko hissed. There she heard Hard Truth scoff at her. Oh, that's rich coming from the girl who wants to wear Izuku's skin like wearing a sweater or Okiko's face like if you were wearing glasses, an accessory. It spoke sharply, jovial tone gone. You can run from the truth all you want. In the end, it will catch you tired and hiss at your ears all that you don't want to hear. It spoke harshly. Is there a point to all of this? Himiko scoffed as she turned, seeing the mirage of that hick, battle-worn, and that armor scratched in several parts. Why do you keep lying to yourself? It suddenly spoke, arms crossed and obviously glaring at her despite the visor covering most of her orit face. The more you deny it, the more hard it will be to come back after you accept it. Lying. I don't lie to myself. I am free. Himiko hissed, arms extended, and a grimace of pain formed on her face, reminding her that her shoulder has yet to heal properly. That's why you want to become someone else but yourself. Because good old Himiko is unwanted. That struck a chord in Himiko. He's right, you know, it hissed to her ear. How can you claim you love when you can't love yourself? Himiko hissed as she turned around and tried to hit the mirage of the hick, only hitting air instead. always looking for the next face to wear, the next person to replace, all in hopes of finding what you never had. Real love, someone that loves you for who you are. It hissed at her, mirth coating her words. But you won't find it, because you keep searching for that feeling they failed to give. You know it. I know it. Hell AFO knows it, and he has not even met them. Considering how old he is, he must have seen thousands of you doing the same song and dance over the years, and it amuses him to no end. You're wrong, Himiko hissed. Am I? Here you are bemoaning the fact you couldn't become Izuku, you couldn't drink his blood, you couldn't see what allowed him to speak to you like that. It continued, moving around her, stalking her. It is infuriating that given the answer you refuse it. It answered with a sneer. Answer. Don't make me laugh. I know who I am. I know what I want. Himiko answered with a sneer. Do you? It asked with a small smirk forming on its lips. Run from it. Hide from it. The truth will always find you. And this is the truth until you don't learn to love yourself, to embrace yourself. You'll never know love, let alone the meaning of it. You can claim you know what love is, but to others, it will always be an empty word coming out of your lips because you have failed to love yourself. Himiko remained quiet, glaring at the mirage of the hick. And you can hate me all you want, but you can't lie to yourself. If you're going to hate, do it honestly at least, and if you're going to lie to yourself, at least pretend each word doesn't unravel you by the seams. Enough. Himiko snapped, the mirage vanishing with a mirthful chuckle, leaving her panting and sweating in anger and fear. Because, somewhere in the deep dark recess of her mind, she knew it was right. That Izuku, sweet, cute, dangerous, murderous Izuku was right all along. How she could claim to love him when she couldn't even muster the courage to look at herself in the mirror and love what was staring back at her. That the cracked, broken, rabid beast that stared back was worthy of her affection, and until she could do so, she would not be able to understand what was love. She hated the fact that the mirage of a quirk was right, but she was also stubborn. She had come far, very far without yielding. Yielding means admitting defeat. Himiko had been losing for a long time. It was high time she knew what was to win. And if the world couldn't accept her for who she was and her love for what it was, then the world could burn for all she cared. Anastasia's current standing meant that she spend less time on the field and more time behind a desk, browsing files, and getting a hump and carpal issues due to desk work. So she wasn't really concerned when another file arrived at her desk 2 hours before turning to lunch. What's this? She asked the aide who brought it. The file looked freshly made and sloppily so. An update on Leviathan and Hephaestus. The aide said, not knowing what each thing meant, not enough clearance. His looking at this file meant he would get a bullet to the head, so she was glad it wasn't the case. He was good and made good coffee too. It hadn't been long since she had started to adopt codenames on VIPs that she, and by extension the country, had its eyes on. For example, Star and Stripe, despite working closely with the army and her quirk being a state secret, was someone that could not be controlled as she answered to the WHA and not any other governmental agency in the USA. Didn't help either that the number of people that could face her upfront could be counted with one hand, and the number of people that could talk some sense into her didn't see eye to eye with the best interest of the nation. Leviathan, better known as Izuku Midoriya, was such an example of a VIP that was also catalogued as both a danger to the nation and an asset. An asset because he was among the few people that could go toe-to-toe against Star and Stripe if she ever went rogue. Big if because Star has more experience than he does. He was also a danger because the last file she got of him before entering UA and pretty much having a blackout of info was that he could toss suns as grenades, fuck tanks, and nukes. When you can toss suns as handheld grenades, then you're a danger to everyone. A danger that could not be touched because he hasn't given a reason to do so. Be a let be kind of situation. As long as she doesn't poke the dragon won't breathe fire on her fields, which was good. But Hephaestus, it was more personal, for her and well the nation. Officially Melissa Shield is an islander. The islander facility is its own country. Their borders were international waters up to 1,000 kilometers around the island itself. Unofficially Melissa had American citizenship due to her being born to American parents, but being born on the island itself gave her dual nationality. That's why it was of the utmost importance to find a way to bring her to America and ground her here. Not only she was the mastermind of the SHD network, a monster of a security system that beefed up the already impressive defenses of Island and ensured that even the ground forces could operate with special force-like efficiency and gear, but also she had developed a nanite solution. A solution from which all that remained was inside her and operating in sync with her body and a newly awakened quirk. The fact that whatever had caused this was, in fact, a plan she had outlined in case Island did get out of hand and decided to assassinate its heads didn't even bother her. Only the fact it had been used beforehand by someone else, surely the troop. It had all the hallmarks of being something they would do. Especially considering it could have been a retaliatory strike after the way Island had interfered in many of their operations and the shelter they provided to the Midoriyas. But they had used one of her plans. The only reason this hasn't devolved into a political nightmare was because no one took authority over the action, and she means no one, not even the troop, even if they were the authors. As she opened the file, her eyes scanned the contents contained in the pages. Each page, each word made her eyes widen. I received some startling information too. It appears the USJ was attacked just shy hours ago. The authors were a combined force of local villains with a bow of their own creation and the troop's own bows. We just were able to confirm this information, the aide said, somewhat nervous. Why I received this just now? This shows that the attack was done 5 hours ago, she asked. Media blackout by UA at the first hour. There was little information until the usual leaks began appearing over the internet. By then UA had already a story made and most villains had been captured, the aide replied. What I mean is why I am receiving this now. This should have been on my desk the moment the blackout occurred, not after, Anastasia replied. Our eyes there were greatly hampered by the situation alone. It's the first big attack since the attack of Japan last year by anyone. They are also focused on the rumors regarding the MLA acquiring troop gear pilfered after the attacks, the aide replied. Anastasia sighed with a grunt of anger, but then calmed down, placing the folder back on the desk slowly. Do we have a list of casualties? None. It appears that the students attacked were able to defend themselves. As we are aware, they are also part of the group that was kidnapped and sent into that base that crashed into Hashima Island, Anastasia hummed in contemplation, realizing what this was at first glance. It was a probing attack. These villains were testing the defenses of UA, likely found a gap they tried to exploit, and paid the price for it. But the fact that the troop joined in meant that they had found the same defense gap, that the troop had eyes on UA, on Midoriya, on S.H.I.E.L.D., on assets that she was looking to acquire. This would not stand. The question was how to fight it off. This would require a meeting, because UA, one of the most secure hero institutions in the world, was attacked. If it happened to UA, it could happen to any other institution in the world, and Anastasia was not interested in reviving the dark age of shootings in American schools. Waving the aide away, Anastasia reached for her smartphone. Callahan, get Samuel Abraham. Tell him that he better have something to show. Let's see if some of David's and Melissa's brilliance rubbed on him and made something possible for Defense Japan. UA-1A dorms, morning. The state of waking up suddenly can be described as a sudden jolt spamming every muscle in your body, followed by gravity itself suddenly increasing everything in your stomach and making the very air there to drop. That was exactly what woke Melissa up, jolting into a panicked state and reaching for the first thing that she had at hand, which turned out to be a simple nail gun. In a panic, she pointed it in the general direction while her eyes adjusted to the light around, which wasn't much. Breathing hard, Melissa took a deep breath. Reaching for her right hand and gripping her forearm with her left, she forced her arm down, placing it alongside the nail gun on the desk where she had been sleeping. It took her a full minute to release her grip on the nail gun, which at this point the grip was useless, making her frown. Wonderful, she muttered as she took stock of where she was, and was glad it was a familiar place. Due to the size of the dorms themselves, there were rooms that were unoccupied in every sense. As a result, the class as a whole had to decide what to do with them. After all, they would spend the next 3 years living here. It was decided that one room would be focused solely on meditation. Usually, Izuku used it to center himself whenever he had a breakthrough with his light or darkness, the room being fairly simple, but featuring elements that one would find in a place of mediation, like incense, a mat to lay on, and small speakers for relaxing mood music to get you in the mood. Honestly, Izuku, Momo, and Tokoyami used it more, with Mineta and Siro being the ones who used it also, for some reason. Then there was this room, the tinkering room Ojiro had called it once, and the name stuck because that's what it was, a room for tinkering. It wasn't like the labs back in Island, or the labs on the 3rd floor of the support department of UA's main building, but it was serviceable enough for what she needed, a space to store the 3D printer she had brought from Island, alongside several hard drives and PC towers and 2 screens to work in on specialized gear and even work from time to time in her light version of the SHD network from which Siva was tied to. The only odd element was a small mini-fridge that Kaminari had brought, placed in a corner and filled with 2 cans of monstrous energy drink, bags of death Cheetos, So spicy I'll burn a hole in your soul. And gelatin just because. This was her workstation. Here she made the Seeker mines as they were tied to the SHD network onboard her shield watch. She didn't trust much in letting anyone handle her tech, especially after the Siva fuck-up. That went double considering that the Seeker mine technology and the SHD tech were, well, I-Island tech. That went triple considering that the support department had my Hatsum, whose lack of restraint in the creation of support gear has led to several explosions in the support department. No way in hell she is letting the pink bomber cause more mayhem with defective Seeker mines, especially considering that the payload of the mines was a modified concoction that made up the flashbang grenades and whatever Izuku could cook up with his elemency grenades. Which reminded her of something. She hoped Izuku could still make elemency grenades, or she was going to stick with basic flashbangs that seek their targets instead of flashbangs that seek their enemy and have void in them and would suppress them because fuck you. Sighing, she stood up, the armor plates on her hero costume making some sound as she began to make her way out of the room, slowly tugging away the belts and buckles that held some part of her suit together. She would take it all together back in her room and pack it up for the support department to repair and then wash because the guys have to see it first and see what damage it has. Honestly, after a bath, a healthy breakfast burrito, and a nap, she would be ready to hit the board and draw some modifications of her own exiting the room and making it to the living room. She was kinda surprised by what she saw. She knew everyone had stayed in the living room and slept in, mostly because everyone had been too afraid to go to their rooms after the clusterfuck that was yesterday. So bad it was that most of them still had their hero costumes on. She could see piles of the bulkiest parts of their costumes tossed into a pile. She knew she would have to beat safety measures to Bakugo because his gauntlets are filled with explosive material that could blow up if they are heated. That pile is just a hazard ready to cause one. Yet what caught her attention was how her classmates were accommodated to one another. Despite being 2 years older than everyone in the class, thanks to Siva she had actually aged back 2 years. For some reason, apparently Siva tried to heal her to a state where it could effectively bond with her. For all intents and purposes, she was 15 despite being 17. Thus with age came wisdom to take pictures of her classmate for future blackmail. Pulling her smartphone, she began taking pictures. One where Mina was pretty much curled like a cat on Kirishima's lap, while his hand was on her fluffy hair, her tail wrapped around his waist. 2 where Toru was snuggling on Ojiro, or better said snuggled on his tail, head buried on the fuzz of it. Kyoka had become a full cat, snuggled on Denki's lap, a blanket over her body while Denki slept, drool coming out of his open mouth. Somehow Bakugo and Tsuyu had heads bonked to one another, sleeping soundly, and then there were Izuku and Okako. She took 3 pictures from different angles where Okako was pretty much the big spoon for Izuku's little spoon. Being smaller was pretty much trapped between Okako's arms and bulk. She slightly smiled, seeing the state of some people around. Momo and Shoto were pretty much the only normal ones, Momo leaning her head on Shoto's shoulder while his head rested on hers, oblivious to the world, the both of them. Not to mention that Mineta was somehow tucked on the ground like a dog, or that Tokurami's Lady Shadow, Dark Shadow, she can't really keep up with this, has cocooned her master and he looked like the edgiest burrito ever made by human hands. Or Soto, who was awake and making breakfast way to fucking minute. You awake? Melissa asked the Lucador-themed hero who didn't even flinch at her tone or her sudden intrusion. Yeah. Cooking relaxes me, you know, planning to make pancakes because we all need the sweet after that mess, he said simply. Just getting the batter ready then hitting the showers. Yeah, me too, she mentioned, seeing the wear and tear on Soto's torso section. Where you were launched anyway? She asked. Conflagration zone. Apparently Midoriya isn't the only one with acquaintances on the other side, Soto replied, looking at the sleeping Hagakyu. There was someone, a chick Toru-san knew, tried to kill us. Toru wasn't happy, looked ready to murder her. Never gonna piss her off after seeing her eat the light the fires were giving out and doing what she did to one guy. He seemed to shudder at that. Have you ever heard about bringing your feet to your mouth? Melissa nodded. Toru made it happen to someone. The sound alone, and the scream, he shuddered again, finishing the batter and putting it on the fridge. Okay, let's hit the showers. I smell to burned hair and sweat, he added. I smell the dirt, blood, and iron. Not the most pleasant smell after ozone burning thanks to Izuku and Arc Light. Also, you better take pictures for blackmail. I sure did, she teased, only hearing a scoff. Did that already. Not that I need them. Girls love my cooking. Can make them do anything I want for a piece of chocolate cake. Fuck, you're right, Melissa would certainly tackle Uncle Might herself if one of Soto's cakes was thrown as a reward for such a thing. Regardless, Melissa put that into the back burner as she made it into her bedroom, deciding to take the stairs instead of using the elevator because the sound of her costume created a somewhat comfortable sound to her. 2 minutes later, she was in her bedroom, costume shed, and in the shower, the water soothing her nerves. There, in her shower, she slowly began to shake, the facade slowly falling out. With a gasp, she slammed her hand on the linoleum of the shower wall, cracking it. The bioelectric current of one for all gave her the strength to cause the crack and leave an imprint of her hands on the wall while Siva protected her palms from tearing skin. She thought she would be ready for the nerve-wracking fight that was a hero-a-villain fight. Hell, she thought everyone would be. Alas, it seemed no one was truly ready for the evil of mankind. Reaching for the handle of the shower, she tugged the shower off, letting the water fall off her, eyes slightly darting around, breath erratic. Keep it together. Keep it together, she muttered to herself as she reached for her towel and exit the shower. She had to keep it together, calm herself, perhaps talk with Hound Dog and sort it all together. She gonna need a session with Hound Dog because right now she feels like when she nearly got killed back in Island. She could smell the fire and the ashes despite being in her room. Could feel a weight inside her chest, despite having nothing in it. Yeah, she needed a session with the therapist because this can't be healthy, especially with a haunted quirk on the mix that is neighboring with a quirk that helped manifest a paracausal force. But first, breakfast. The thing that woke Okako from her admittedly comfortable position was an incessant banging, a banging that began to make her angry. Eyes opening in anger after realizing that ignoring the banging wouldn't make it go away, Okako slowly woke up, brain booting up and making her realize she had slept in the living room with the others and had used Izuku as a life-size teddy bear. A very warm one, she admits. The fact the rest was still asleep made her wonder how tired they truly were after yesterday's events, or why Izuku, the one with the abnormal stamina that wakes up before anyone else to squeeze a meditation, wasn't awake. Maybe he was comfortable with her too. Slowly untangling herself from Izuku, Okako slowly sat up, not disturbing anyone else. She wasn't going to tease Tsuyu for her position with Bakugo or how cute Momo and Shoto looked or why Mina decided to mimic Kyoka and sleep like cats on the laps of Kirishima and Kaminari. Only that when Mina decides to tease, she will have Emo to tease back. The banging on the door continued, and Okako got angrier. Someone had pulled her away from her snuggles, and that someone was going to pay. With a small snarl, Okako opened the door with a phrase in her mouth instantly. "Someone better be dead or I swear to God," she muttered to the two people that were on the other end of the door. Kendo and Momona. One she liked, the other she would yeet to a missile if he tries this shit again. Oh, Itsuka began, seeing the state in which Okako had just opened the door, still clad in her hero costume, so said costume filled with dirt, cuts, dried up blood, and the utter "I'm done with life" look Okako had on her face. Okako for her part observed both Itsuka and Monoma. Itsuka was dressed in an aquamarine t-shirt with beige cargo pants and sandals, while Monoma looked like he was going out on a date with how he was dressed, the leather jacket, the blue jeans, and the white shirt underneath alongside the slick hairstyle he had. Well, Monoma on the other hand, it seems that as usual 1A is struggling to even start a day, while we are ready and raring to go about us. For shame, he said, striking a pensive pose. Okako wasn't having it, of course. Bold words for someone who can send you to the fucking moon, Okako snapped to Monoma, who immediately stopped any attempt at taunting when he heard her tone of voice, clipped, harsh. Not something the usually sweet girl of 1A would have in her tone, which was friendlier and more comforting. "Okay, I see we got you at a bad time," Kendo began, instantly taking over the conversation and ensuring that Monoma doesn't end up eating moon dust. "We just wanted to inform you that classes are cancelled for 3 days after what happened at the USJ," she informed. We didn't know that. I guess Yomomo's attention was elsewhere," Okako muttered. "Regardless, we are planning something to unwind after that disaster. Tomorrow at noon we are planning a small cookout in our dorms. You're all invited," Kendo said with a smile. Under protest, Monoma added as an afterthought. "Nobody cares, Nito, let it go," Kendo reminded. "No." Okako sighed. Any other day she would find the interaction of Itsuka and Nito funny. Now she had no patience for it. She wanted to be back to being a big spoon, a warm one at that. "Okay, I'll let everyone know about it. We just need time," Okako said, stepping back and reaching for the door. "Just make sure that Shinsu doesn't do anything stupid, okay?" "We are not in the mood," Okako added, seeing Itsuka and a reluctant Monoma nod at her. "Thanks, have a good day," she added as she closed the door, then turned around, ready to be back into a snuggle fest. Only for that to end when she saw Izuku already up, his new rabbit ears droopy and signaling his state of mind, drowsy and somewhat sad. Fuck, it was almost noon by the time Nedzu had arrived at Tartarus, the supermax prison located in the middle of the sea bordering Japan's water and whose only connection to the mainland was a bridge which had turrets upon turrets, and underneath lay several executor-class mechs ready to lay the pain on whoever stupid enough to try and stage an escape attempt onto the most protected jail in the world. Nedzu knew that Tartarus boasted more than guns to ensure that those inside remained inside, as most prisoners were way too dangerous to be allowed out, and quite a chunk were waiting for their turns on death row, just like the recaptured Moonfish and Muscular after Raxus. Those two were just a pair of names on a long list of villains, true monsters that had no forgiveness or redemption. Reaching the entrance of the Supermax jail, he spotted the president of the HPSC. The woman was flanked by two of the jailers of the prison, Gyges and Briarios. The guards are brothers of the Bronze Gate, the first major obstacle anyone would have to overcome to even think entering Tartarus proper. Madame Nedzu began. Seeing the wary woman nod at him, she looked tired, way too much than she usually did. But considering that the HPSC had been understaffed for some time, it wasn't odd that she looked like she had been putting some extra time. After all, Nagant's rampage ensured that she ended up as the current president, after Nagant had ended up killing the former president, his successor, and nearly everyone essential to the functioning of the HPSC proper. The ones currently at the helm of the HPSC were all at one time low-key members that knew how to operate the organization because they were at one time peons, were observant enough to see how their superiors did things and ensured not to do the same mistakes that unleashed Nagant. But the actions of Nagant had left the organization basically working out on fumes. Madam President herself had no heir apparent to her position, Mera being the only soul around that seemed to be capable of filling her shoes should something happen to her. Nedzu, the woman, replied with that impervious look on her face, yet her stoicism was mixed also with exhaustion. "Follow me, we have much to do today," she said, nodding to Gyges and Briarios. "For the record, madam," Gyges began, "the warden has expressed concern about this. Tell him that I heard his concerns and I summarily ignored them. Times are changing, Gyges. We sink or swim. Tell him that," she said as the massive doors opened right before her, Nedzu not far behind her. The trek around the Supermax prison was, as one would expect, silent, mechanical, and oddly unnerving. Nedzu equated the prison halls to the halls of that medical facility that he demolished on his escape years back. Yet as he walked he realized something. We aren't going under. Why are we going upwards? Because despite the danger she poses and training she boasts, unlike the rest she can easily be contained, Madam President replied. That sounds arrogant, Nedzu replied smoothly, not even disturbed by what was being implied. He had suspected for some time what had been her fate, but was unable to confirm it. Tartarus, after all, might as well be a black hole of information. It's the truth, all the women said as they continued their trek under the vigilant watch of several cameras that followed their every move. At long last, and after what felt like hours to the principal of UA, they reached a cell that felt isolated from the rest. Each cell is capable of containing the most dangerous individuals our society can breed, but we do use natural barriers to ensure they can't escape should they be able to leave their cells, she began. Like the one cell underneath Tartarus that has All for One's name on it. The one and only. If that thing, she spat, can be called human, then it has human flaws and weaknesses, ergo the bottom of the ocean. Let's see it survive explosive decompression after getting riled with .50 explosive, depleted uranium-tipped rounds, she said. But this one I commissioned. Didn't have the heart to do it. She was our mistake, a mistake that shouldn't have happened, but it did because we wanted a weapon. Don't know why my predecessor complained. He got what he wanted. The thing was for most, a weapon that grows a consciousness is a flawed one, and therefore disposable. Nedzu actually nodded solemnly. He had quite a picture of that. He almost lived it. He knew that whatever had co-opted the remaining recourses in Japan of the troop turned to be the T-doll that Midoriya-san had mauled in his soiree in the Colosseum. This in itself brought a new amount of uncomfortable questions and possible answers as to why the troop had remained inactive globally, but in Japan, they had reactivated. It looks like we will have to investigate Hashima after all. Maybe to see if Tidal was right in his exclamations before he died, he thought as Madam President reached for a handprint reader on the side of the metallic door, pressed her hand, the scanner built into the reader doing its job. Pistons and locks opened as the metallic door unlocked, then with a hiss it shot downward, revealing the room within. Revealing the person within. The room had a bed, bolted and fused to the floor, alongside a solid piece of a cube that passed as a chair, also fused to the very ground, a small cubicle in which lay a toilet and a wash basin, all in metal, also fused to the very floor and wall, to prevent the user or anyone really to use anything as a weapon. The person in question was currently doing pull-ups from a single bar that was stuck on each end of the walls, fused, allowing her to pull herself up and down easily. Kaina-san, Madam President's voice made the woman stop. Short indigo hair with pink highlights here and there mated the sweaty and well-muscled back of the woman. The woman, Kaina, let out a grunt as she slowly lost her grip on the rail, landing on the ground softly and letting 2 deep breaths. Madam President Kaina began, turning around, indigo eyes staring right at the woman in front of her, cold, calculating, tired. "It's been a while," she said, sweat forming on her brow. That it has, Madam President," said, motioning to Nedzu. "This is Principal Nedzu, from UA Academy," that made the woman, Kaina, raise an eyebrow. "Principal, what happened to Amaterasu?" she asked as she went to the bed and sat, letting out a sigh. "She suffered a heart attack in September, 10 years ago, had to retire due to the stress and I took over in late November," Nedzu replied smoothly, seeing how Madam President sat on the block of steel that apparently was a chair. "I haven't come here to socialize, Kaina-san," Madam President began. "We need you there." The woman rose her hand up, shaking her head. "First, no. Second, I'm in jail. Third, I am no longer an assassin," she replied. "You misunderstand," Nedzu cut in. "I don't need the assassin of the HPSC. I need the hero Lady Nagant and her experience in combat," he replied smoothly. "Again no," Kaina stated. "I am in jail, and in case you didn't realize, for good reasons, stupid but good, I butchered the upper head of the HPSC in cold blood. You really think someone will want me outside?" she asked. "This is not what politicians want," Madam President snapped. "I argued against your use to purge dissidents. Look where it lead you. Unstable and demoralized, seeing only whatever came out of your rifle as the only solution to problems, not even capable of looking at children without seeing them neck deep in the blood of your targets," the president of the HPSC snapped, then sighed. "Truth of the matter is that we need your experience. You might not know it, but Japan just suffered one of its worst attacks in years. Not even the dark age of quirks could compare to what happened last year." Kaina, upon seeing the president looking exhausted, seemed to bring something out of her. "Okay, I'll bite. What has happened?" she asked. "A lot," Nedzu replied simply. "Fill me in then," and so Nedzu did. For the next hour, Nedzu filled Kaina Tsutsumi, also known as the former heroine Lady Nagant, about the events of last year. In the beginning, she was nonplussed. She had suspected for some time that the troop was already in Japan, the only group of people she would happily turn her rifle on and shoot without a guilty conscience. The events that led to the Colosseum and the main actors began to tickle her fancy, up until she learned that someone had been born with an ability that was eerily similar to that of All For one of her main targets that she never nailed due to how underground the asshat lived. The fact this kid had single-handedly caused such a reaction of the troop, sending T-Dolls, quirk-enhanced bows, the Raxus bombing, and then the generalized attack to Japan just to get him, to silence him due to what he had exposed just for defending a girl from being raped. To say it had escalated quickly was the understatement of the century. Then Nedzu told her what really went down during the attack on Japan. The gas. The real targets. Children. The troop had targeted children in what was perhaps the worst chemical attack of the last 200 years, a disaster that shook her to the core. To be honest, to learn that they had unleashed a mutagenic gas that had killed 80% of the children population on the age of 10 to 15, leaving 20% left with mutations on their quirks and a generational gap in everything, not just heroics. The current hero generation would have to hold the fort for at least 5 years alongside the new one for they become an effective force again, and that's just for heroics. She didn't even want to think about the other walks of life, doctors, cops, desk workers. Japan had already been suffering from decreasing birth rates before quirks emerged. Quirk marriages increased the birth rates for a time, but this was the single greatest blow to a country in ages. Don't take out the army, don't take out the government, take out their future, take their children away and you take away a country's future. As Nedzu continued explaining, adding the event of just a day ago, an attack to the USJ, the suspicious of a traitor, and the possibility that All For One and the troop were in direct conflict or using one another, Kaina remained silent, but her wide eyes and slightly pale skin, paler than what she had before she met them both, told everything about what was going on her head now. As he ended, Kaina took a deep breath, hands now clasped in front of her, then brought them under her chin. "So, what part do I play in this?" she asked. "We need your experience in both combat and wet works." Your official position would be of combat instructor for both heroics classes of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd years, teaching them what not to do as heroes in the field. Their kinda snorted. Her entire tenure as the HPSC's attack dog could be summarized as that, what not to do as a hero. Additionally, you will serve as extra security to both heroic classes for one specific purpose, Nedzu added. The traitor kinda muttered, expecting an order to deal with the traitor in the way she knew how. Yes, once found, we will use him or her, Nedzu relayed, making kinda blink. Pains me to admit it, but all for one got one on us, skipping one of his collaborators right under our noses. The idea here is to identify and monitor the traitor, use him or her to take out this league of villains in a single movement, then got after all for one. That was quite a bold plan. The attack of the USJ could be done by anyone, but the League was looking for All Might. All Might, who had to be with that class that day. The League had access to our records and looked for All Might specifically, so we will use All Might as bait. Sounds good. But again, there is a problem, kinda said, suddenly motioning to all around her. I'm in jail for manslaughter, regardless of how you want to paint it. I am a criminal, and doubt I will be accepted with open arms, especially with parents. Do not worry about it. Madam President began. UA currently has vigilantes as teaching staff, and we had to employ them during the raids conducted on troop bases. No one complained. Besides, very few would raise an eyebrow when Kaina Tsutsumi, not Lady Nagant, enters UA and offers her services as a trainer with combat experience. Madam President replied smoothly. Also, things are going to change. Soon, she replied, making Kaina raise an eyebrow. Like, she asked. For 2 seconds, Madam President remained quiet. Then she spoke after seemingly finding a reason to. The attack of the troop exposed weaknesses. Weaknesses that cost us a lot, she began. It took a child to literally expose them, and by that point, we were still dragging our knuckles. I will admit that part of the reason is that we lack manpower. People want to be heroes, not be tied to desk jobs. They kinda nodded. That was true. But that's not an excuse. After the Colosseum, we had targets, we had manpower, we should have been ready for anything. But we weren't. Not even close. A biological attack was made and we had no directives on how to react to it. For fuck's sake, Bolivia has directives for something like this, because the WHA has them and pretty much enforced them to the letter, even if the Bolivian government didn't like it, Madam President stated, making kinda blink. So, as a means to counter several actions dealt by collaborators of the troop in governmental places, kinda actually huffed, of course, properly dealt with, but still, the damage has been done. We have decided that the HPSC has outlived its usefulness. As we speak, representatives of the WHA are in Japan incognito, slowly but surely learning about our laws and how to handle them once the WHA takes over the functions of the Hero Public Safety Commission, Madam President stated, making Kaina's eyes go wide. You, what? Kaina began, looking at Nedzu, the chimera not even fazed by the news, which in itself was concerning. Did it mean he already knew? The HPSC has been shown to be lacking. We didn't adapt to the times. As a result, we were unable to handle the situation presented to us during the attacks on Japan as a whole. So to prevent something of this caliber ever happening again, let it be villain groups or another terrorist organization, we have decided to permit the WHA, which has dealt with issues like these before, to take over our functions. Honestly, it was a long time coming, Madam President replied smoothly. But Kaina was actually shocked beyond belief. I heard the rumors back in the day. How representatives of the WHA met with the former head and tried to ensure a smooth transition to a WHA-regulated administration. I always wondered why he didn't accept it, she wondered. Their Madam President snorted. Why do you think? Aside traditionalists standing in their way and whispering in my predecessor's ear. Enough dirty secrets that could have ruined more than a dozen careers across the entirety of the government, she said. Not to mention the amount of dirty laundry we have inherited. I will admit that at one point we did send Hawks on a mission like the ones you went. But unlike you, Hawks, well, you had time to grow. We got you as an adolescent. Hawks's mom pretty much sold him to us as a child, Madam President admitted. Kaina actually groaned. You got another? Never mind, what else do I have to expect? Kaina asked. Media? Because I didn't like them before and sure as hell I still hate them now. Inevitable, Nedzu replied. The moment the HPSC disbands and the WHA takes over operations, leaks can occur. There will be employees of the HPSC that will be displaced or can be bought. You can connect the dots there. Kaina nodded at that. Money does lose the tongue. Then, Kaina asked the question that was burning her soul. And you all? The ones that got away and just knew and let it all happen. What about them, she asked. Their Madam President grew silent for 5 seconds, hands clasped under her chin. The WHA inevitably will uncover many of our indiscretions, past and present. Kinda snorted at that. Remember the incident in India? How could anyone forget? It had been a clusterfuck of a situation. India, even before quirks, had been known for having a corrupt police force and a government that was overworked to the bone due to the sheer amount of people the country simply had. So they let things happen, having one of the worst impunity rates before quirks emerged. When quirks emerged, things got from bad to worse. Now the civilians had the means to fight back, and the police had gone from silently corrupt and violent to openly corrupt and violent. Reason why heroes did not emerge there up until 20 years ago, and up to that moment India became the most corrupt country on the world. However, that was because the WHA had to intervene because the Indian government had turned a blind eye to the creation of a quirk regulation administration that was not that, but rather a glorified Gestapo. The end result had been an assault of heroes from across the world on that administration during a popular uprising, with the backing of the American, Asian, and European governments. As in every country in those continents' sides, India pretty much saying stop this bullshit because this glorified Gestapo had actually got people from other countries killed, including politics representatives from other countries on visits, and they were using the Indian government as a shield and the innocent civilian population as scapegoats, and everyone, and she means everyone, was done with their bullshit and pretty much the world had orchestrated a coup. The aftermath was not widely known, mostly because the details resembled a barcode on paper, but a lot of officials of the Indian government got retired and were replaced by more agreeable counterparts that understood that picking a fight with the people they are supposed to govern is a bad idea, especially when they govern the country with the largest concentration of people per square meter. So, you think you might get retired? She asked. Honestly, Kinda had no ill intentions against the woman aside from keeping her in jail. At least she didn't toss the key away. Possibly. I might not have a hand in the events that led to your eventual breakdown, but I perpetuated it with hawks. I have to pay, as many on the upper echelons. It's just facts. At the very least there won't be a bloody coup of the government this time around, she joked, but Kinda knew this was a small attempt to add some levity to the situation. At best, the current high echelons of the HPSC would be asked to leave Japan altogether and onto a Caribbean paradise where they can spend their twilight years. That is, if their crimes are not that severe. Honestly, money laundering can be easily covered. But assassinations are another thing altogether, even more, if they had a political tint to them. Anyway, Kinda, you would be released under Nedzu's care, or more precisely under UACE, as it had become a boarding school. The fuck happened really? I get the troop, but what forced that? Kinda asked. Some troop sleeper agents within the government, nothing to worry about now, they have been dealt with. They could be taking your cell in the future, Nedzu said cheerfully, making Kinda hide a grimace. Anyway, Madam President replied smoothly, bringing the attention back to her. Your job would be very simple, be the combat instructor and moral teacher of the hero classes, 1 per day. Unofficially, you are to find and identify AFO's infiltrator. Once found, surveillance can be done and use him or her to deal with AFO once and for all, the president stated. And how do you plan to accomplish that? Kinda asked. As far as I know, we only have All Might, but if the stories are true, which I assume they are because of course, we are dealing with a 200 quirk monster that has had enough time to learn how his shit works, she summarized. Short of dropping a nuke, I can't see All Might dealing with that guy alone. Speaking realistically, the guy's strong, but quantity over quality here, and All for One has enough quirks to surpass All Might. Measly 1 quirk, Kinda reasoned. Nedzu simply quirked his mouth, a mocking smile, Kinda noted. That's why he won't fight alone, Nedzu replied smoothly, and there it clicked. The kid, Midoriya was it? You're sending him against that thing. That kid is what I can confidently call a monster, a paracausal entity from which the troop created quirked bows and Terminator dolls with quirks just to try to keep up. A monster that can tip the fight in our favor. A monster whose greatest weapon is not the arsenal of powers that range from quantum fires and weaponized hard light photonic blasts to gravitational anomalies and shouts that can rend the soul, Nedzu stated. No, his greatest weapon is his mind. His quirk is fairly new, so it's not as refined as his real strength, the ability to observe quirks and find weakness around them regardless of what they are, and All for One is just one big target begging to be torn down by this kid. That is what I'm counting on, Nedzu finalized. Honestly, the kid, Midoriya-san, would be in a support capacity. He can heal Kinda, like healing without any repercussions. They Kinda looked at the president in shock. This she didn't know, only the bare minimum told to her regarding the kid that spooked the troop. He doesn't need to fight, just keep our fighters healed while hitting AFO with one of his strange shouts, or simply render his molecular structure weak enough for All Might to punch him into paste. I don't care, Madam President. Stated. This will be the last task of the HPSC. Put the symbol of evil and his organization down. We have the tools, they just need sharpening, and ensure his rat doesn't squeak, she added. You know, Kinda began. The moment I step into UA he will know. A new teacher at this height. A combat instructor no less, considering that All Might is teaching too. That's gonna ring some alarm bells. Then Nedzu smiled, and now it wasn't a mocking smile, it was downright vicious. Oh, I am counting on it. There she realized that this plan, this thing, all this was not even stage 1. No, her being recruited was the first step, the drawing on the board. You're all playing a dangerous game, Kinda said. That fucker of AFO is old. I didn't even was able to find him. He toyed with me and let me crumbs to follow into what I assumed was him, but instead ended up hitting walls, she reminded. Not to mention the troop and the MLA, she said. They're both Nedzu, and Madam President nodded. The third opposing party, the one that had yet to do anything, the Meta Liberation Party, Destro's legacy to Japan, whether the country wanted it or not. Yes, unlike the first two, this one had remained largely silent, Nedzu said, although we have reasons to believe why they are silent, really. Kinda asked. They are preparing for war, was all Madam President said. Finish what Destro started, try to free us, as they like to say, she scoffed at that. This is why we have to deal with the troop and AFO, fast, she said. Both groups we can deal with because we know what to expect of them. We don't know what to expect of the MLA. They don't have an outline modus operandi. We don't know how many members they have, how many sleeper cells have across the country, their gathering spots, and we don't even know if the MLA has a cohesive leadership or it's a splintered mishmash of people with ideas, Nedzu admitted. Hell, you guys don't know if they still follow Destro's original ideology of liberation and all that stuff, Kinda said with a sneer. If one thing we agree on is that quirks can't be freely used, especially the kind like mine. Can't do anything with mutant class quirks because they are always active, but the others. We are all just walking weapons with just a bad day away of causing a bloodbath, Kinda said simply, arms crossed. The silence that fell on the cell was only mitigated by the sound of the ventilation in it being active. Say that I'm in, that I agree. What do I get exactly? Kinda asked, indigo eyes narrowed. Freedom to begin with, Nedzu began. Your case would be reviewed and your record cleaned. A job which will be paid, of course, Nedzu added, making her nod. Of course, your hero license would be renewed, but on a temporal basis. You have expressed already not to return to active duty, she nodded at that. We can deal with the second. Ensure that one goes without issue. Accommodations would be provided by UA as per your position as a teacher, and if asked, you would have your old gear back. That made her perk up. You still have my costume. Madam President nodded. Call me sentimental, was all she said. I would have access to the security systems of UA, right? Nedzu nodded. For a second she seemed to think of something, then nod to herself. Free reign on the training of the hero classes. Yes, as long you don't cross any lines. We had issues with Eraserhead, but UA staff enjoys a greater freedom regarding their lessons, Nedzu admitted. Okay, I'm in. Kinda noted how Madam President let out a sigh of relief. She found it amazing they were stressed out by this. But I do have conditions, nothing too bad, she said. First I need a crash course on how to teach because I have no idea how. Nedzu nodded at that, surely prepared for this. You won't be introduced up until next week at best. All Might had to take classes too to teach. That caught Kinda by surprise. All Might's what? For her part, Madam President was glad this had ended up on a positive note. Kinda was an effective asset that could tip the balance in their favor, especially considering that AFO had someone on his ranks with a quirk similar to his and access to bow creation technology. The very thought of him having that scared her deeply. The man was dangerous enough with his quirk alone. Now he had all that at his disposal? Yeah, this had become an arms race to arm one another for the upcoming conflict on the horizon. However, Kinda had a point. They knew what to expect of AFO and the troop, and so did they of each other. No one knew what to expect of the MLA, and that scared her. I have made an intelligent bullet. For the first time in 10 years, Rikia wondered if it had been a good idea to hire this woman. Her meta ability was weird to begin with. Water to her was the equivalent of drinking the most concentrated energy drink made by human hands. And last he checked that one belonged to Monstrous XXXL Black and Blacker, a drink so powerful that it was recommended on the label to use a shot to drink it once per week, otherwise risk a heart attack. Someone dared to drink 2 shots. Rikia clearly remembers he had to get a new driver because his old one drank 2 shots of the stuff and ended up in the hospital, then the morgue. This woman had the same thing running on her veins. Whenever she drank water, her meta ability converted the liquid into that and infused it directly into her veins. Usually, milk ends up neutralizing the effects and acts as a sleeping agent for her. But ever since the arrival of the Metal Gear black box and other material pilfered during several raids of troop sites by police akin to their cause, she hasn't slept a wink, drinking only water and tossing any glass of milk sent to her way onto a wall. That was 6 months ago, and he was growing concerned if he was frank. Her eye bags, or the manic look in her eyes, or the tone of her voice, which was now in all caps, wasn't helping either with his concerns about her health. Or her mental health, to be precise. She is a bright scientist and can make gadgets that are short of amazing. His claustro is in fact a reality thanks to her, so her genius can't be questioned. Still, no one can be right in the head after 6 months of not sleeping. "My dear," he began. "What do you mean?" "I have devised the means to dash. She's distracted, get her." Before he can question it, Rikia sees how a dozen scientists all tackle her to the ground, pretty much forcing her mouth open and pouring a whole pitcher of milk on her open mouth. "Drink and sleep, damn it. FGJKHKGJBSADKJBFKSJD, he would have intervened, but honestly, it was for her own good. 5 minutes later she is sleeping, drooling while 2 guys carry her to her quarters. "So sorry, Yotsubasha-sama, but we were concerned," the lead scientist said with an apologetic look and bowing to him. "Think nothing of it. I was getting worried too," Rikia admits as he saw the man nod. "Nevertheless, she did mention something, didn't she?" "Oh yes," the scientist nodded, perking up. I think she violated several laws of how everything works, but she did manage to do something amazing," he said as he led Rikia towards a table. There, on a metallic table with 3 more scientists, lay what he could safely call a massive, rectangular gauntlet that would be too cumbersome to wield, let alone use. "This," he began, "is the Omnidirector, alpha version. We call it the OD because of reasons," he said with a small laugh, picking up the massive piece of support tech. "This is the beginning of Sahelanthropus' wealth of data paying off." How this, Rikia pointed at a thing in the scientist's hands. "Can be the beginning?" he asked, clearly curious. "Well, sir, you see, Sahelanthropus is way more advanced than we are let on by the Diet. Its targeting system alone is leagues above what even the Americans have. Using complex mathematical formulas and a powerful computer to run any possible scenario and trajectories, Sahelanthropus was able to pull these impossible shots without the need for orbital targeting support," the scientist explained. "Based on this, we designed this. The OD will allow us," he passed the OD to another scientist to put it on. To direct, the scientist fired a single fireball at a wall. "Nothing impressive," Rikia noted. "Our attacks," the scientist then directed his armored arm and fired. Rikia freaked out when the ball of fire passed in front of him and made a curve, hitting once more the wall where it had been fired. And the scientist did it again and again, shifting his arm away, and the fireball fired, taking impossible turns to hit the target once more. "At whatever target we choose, at any angle, control is no longer an issue," he finished as the other scientist put the gauntlet on the table. "Amazing," Rikia said. "This is how." Most of the under-the-hood work came from Amy-san. She was inspired, however, this wouldn't be possible without Sahelanthropus targeting data. Without it, the onboard computer can't calculate the possible angles for the fireball to be redirected, and in the end that is what permit it to keep a lock on target, he explained. "But it's too bulky, we know. Right now the main goal is to reduce its size. For that, we go back to the Metal Gear." So the scientist there turned serious. "That thing should be 3 times its current size. Using current tech it should be 3 sizes bigger and move slower than an executor, yet it was as big as Mount Lady and moved as fast as her. Our best belief is that the troop found a way to miniaturize a lot of the components in the constructions of both Metal Gears, if not every single mech under their command, T-dolls included. If we can get that data on how they do it, we can turn that." The scientist pointed the OD Alpha. Into this he then pointed at his wristwatch. "We have miniaturization technology," Rikia reasoned, thinking of all the support gear his lieutenants had. "Not on this level. Trumpet's helmet requires 2 bracelets to form a single unit, and it's currently our most advanced piece of tech. Parts of it are used on your claustro," so the scientist replied. "But it took us years to make it. However, with the data we could get of the Metal Gear's construction, we could make it even smaller, ring size. Hell, we could make your claustro be wearable by you as a belt instead of waiting in a transport," he said excitedly. And while the prospect of what the scientist said was enticing, Rikia was a realistic. Where do you suggest we get this? Simple. Sahelanthropus not only had the targeting module data but a set of coordinates, where it was made that caught Ricky's attention. Where? He asked. Where else? Tidal told us. He screamed it to the four winds. There Ricky's eyes widened. How could he not? No one looked. Hashima Island, right under at UA Academy, the next day. Against his bet's judgment and the fact there was pork involved, Izuku decided not to go to the barbecue 1B made. The reason? He still needs to find the true extent of the damage done to Hax by that nut job. While true he could have done that yesterday and enjoyed the barbecue today, he still needed to take a shower and take his costume back to support, and things snowballed to the point that by the point he wanted to do some meditation. But he couldn't because he and Okako decided to snuggle some more in her room. Mostly comfort snuggles because the USJ was a damned disaster. Far as he knew, everyone had taken yesterday to do nothing but to become a couch potato or a bed burrito, with the exception of Melissa that had stayed in the tinkering room half a day, then ate and went to her room to become a bed burrito. It was their way to try and decompress and make heads or tails of the USJ situation and the fact there were still assholes willing to try to kill them because they could. The evil of the troop he could stomach because they were a faceless organization. This kind of evil he could not without summoning the face of that nutjob with claws, or the teen with a severed hand on his face as a mask and hateful eyes, and the small child with indifferent eyes. With a sigh, Izuku lay on the ground, lotus seating and taking deep breaths. The sound of a small pond with birds chirping about and grass being moved by the wind exiting the speaker put on the four corners of the room. Closing his eyes, Izuku slowly began to relax, letting his senses envelop his everything, letting the energy that composed everything that was his manifest in a relaxed way, controlled, non-hostile. It was something he had started doing back in the Pussycats compound, once a day, for 10 minutes, to center himself. 10 minutes had become an hour by the time he was in Island. Melissa had called it his me moment, which she wasn't wrong. It was one of those rare instances where he could meditate on himself and where he was now and where his life had led him to. It had become a ritual to not only center himself but to ensure everything was well in control and now going haywire. He wasn't going to lie. By the time he had his last power-up, he was justifiably freaked out by the fact that all he had now hadn't caused him to go mad, or worse, because so much energy should have torn him apart. The fact Melissa knew this but said nothing made him somewhat iffy. He'll get even. She has seen what she eats, some spicy here and there, and his vengeance will be complete. She can't handle spicy food. Releasing himself of those thoughts, Izuku began to slowly breathe in, breathe out. He repeated this 5 times while his eyes were closed. He could see, not in the traditional way, but rather in a more spiritual way, surely the paracausal energies that were the light and the darkness allowing this. This allowed him to see in a way, himself, or to be more precise, visualize himself in an understandable fashion, a way his brain can comprehend and therefore rationalize. It had been Mandalay who had suggested that he use Skyrim's perk system, or better said constellation, to visualize each power and see his progress with each one. It had been an inspired moment, and it had worked well, incredibly well, especially considering he knew the powers at heart and could visualize them easily. Before the USJ, each power was a constellation. Solar was a sword pointed inwards with a maul, a hammer, 2 knives, and a revolver flanking its wings coming behind it. For Armiger, it was a single spiral, but each star seemed to shine like a diamond reflected under the sun. Shouts were a snarling dragon bellowing, loud and proud, and so on and so on. Each power had its own feeling, of course. It helped him identify each one at simple sight. Not that he needed to see them, they felt like a part of him, like a finger. He could identify them without sight. The single taste of solar light in the very sun itself when it shone. The arc current thrummed all around the dorms and on Denki whenever he fired his quirk. The void from which pulsed on Lady Shadow whenever she appeared. Stasis seemed to be ever present in disaster zones where heroes worked, as it represented repressed feelings but also the need for control. He could go on and on. He didn't because he saw what that girl truly did to Hax, and it horrified him. He thought Armiger, the Thuum, blade mode, parasite energy, and glyphs were spared the worst of the attack as the light and darkness took the brunt of her assault. He was wrong. Everything seemed damaged. The constellations that indicated the light and darkness were, for lack of better words, gone, replaced by a single dot of light that shimmered like a pearl. So did the one that showed siren powers. Now there was an extra feeling too, was that video. He did note that the constellations that made up smoke, neon, biotics, and cryomancy were gone, surely fused by whatever strand was in order for the light and darkness to survive. Did it mean he had extra space now? He didn't know. He did note that those that had made it were enveloped by the strand thing, suffused to them, like sewing them back into shape. That meant that he would have to wait for them to be fixed, meaning not using them. Good thing he had some time until that happened. Just like any other quirk in the world, it is a muscle and it has been torn. It needs time to mend. With a sigh, he directed his gaze to one of the new nodes, feeling the combined power of solar light and smoke, fused into a single entity. He idly wondered what happened to concrete. It looked fine, and considering that neon, smoke, and video just got co-opted for the survival of several of his powers, did that meant the now had extra space for new conduit powers, or they still remained, but now heavily mutated by the paracausal powers? Did they still act the same? Plunging in, he saw the single star that was made out of solar smoke, pulsing with the promise of unleashed power, like a star just waiting to be born again. Stars don't have an easy birth. He dreads what would happen now. Still, he had to do something. He was heavily weakened by what had happened. At least if he does this, he will have an idea of what to expect from the others. Take it slow, but firmly. Reaching, his cupped hands actually touched the small star that fitted his hands, which was odd because the void light up. Stars have violent births, and this one was no exception. Yet Izuku wasn't bothered by it. He knew that solar could be as destructive as any fire in the world, but he embraced it because of its dual nature, life and death. There is no life without the warmth of the sun, but fly too close and you will get burned, just like the arrogant Icarus. Yet you had to be like a Chris, the first Cabal Emperor, take the sun, unbothered. Therefore, Izuku did. Therefore, he embraced the sun's warmth, and all at bruff his eyes opened, and he saw a wasteland, red-hot ash falling to the ash-covered ground, smoldering and hissing at his own weight and presence. He could feel the heat, the oppressive weight of ash falling onto his skin, the sensation of burning embers. Fire is death. Ashes remind us of its power. He looked around. Why, it sounded like Endeavor, Osiris, and Parthenax. Yep, he's going crazy. Power at its most primal, change given form, life and death weaved together. The embers on the ground began to glow as the ashes seemed to gain a life of their own, covering him head to toe. Without it, we cannot exist, and with it, we will die, respect it, embrace it, and fear it. The wasteland suddenly lit up, tongues of plasma burning about, and it consumed everything around him. Tongues of fire licked at his ash-covered body. Change given form, so don't fear change, embrace it. Slowly, the plasma-infused ashes gave away, exposing green lush fields. Dead, burnt trees now were healthy. Where it once was dead there was life. You are the heir of ash. Soul burning as 1,000 suns, embrace the duality. What do you want to protect? What do you want to destroy? Izuku closed his eyes, letting sunshine soak through his bones, as pure and as potent as he imagined the sun washing directly onto him would be. You are Phoenix, dead and reborn of ashes. You are human, broken and fixed in ashes. Izuku reached with both hands, letting the sunshine coalesces into his hands, into a fitting form. You are a hero, broken and defiant in ashes. What do you want to destroy? What do you want to protect? Let it guide you. Izuku felt warm metal on his hands, a staff, smooth and polished. He gripped with both hands, eyes opened. Izuku gasped as he took on his surroundings, back in the meditation room, back in the dorms, back in reality. Gasping, he began to take deep breaths. Each inhale and exhale shook the room. He went on like this for a whole minute until he got himself together. That had been an experience, like a real crazy one. He never imagined he would get a reawakening of such caliber. He knew for a fact mediation was the way most guardians attuned themselves to their elements and awoke even more. He never imagined it would be this intense. So real, so surrealistic, so right. Slowly blinking, he felt it, solar light. So right, brimming with potential, ready to be unleashed at his command. Ready to grow more. This was an indicator. He might not be able to recover his old supers or what he could do before, but from ashes, renewal. Also, he might have to take it slow because reawakening his solar light with smoke on the mix was exhausting. Physically he felt fine, but mentally, he felt drained, strangely so. So he would have to hold on awakening Arc, Void, and Stasis once more, especially with the mixes in them. Don't even get him started with Siren's arms mixed with video because of course, it happened. Hopefully, he will be able to make hard light clones that are infused with cosmic energy that cast fists because he sorely needs the extra firepower now. Recovering his breathing, Izuku once more seated in a lotus position. There was one last thing to do before stopping for the day and raiding the fridge for a snack before hitting the books. He needed to see Strand. Taking 2 deep breaths, he closed his eye once more. He was in his mind, his powers visualized. A quick scan around and he found Strand, and boy was it weird. It had already a constellation of its own, what seemed to be that facsimile of finger threaded with strands of something, fabric, energy, the fabric of reality he didn't know. This was new, to be honest, especially since something seemed to jute out of the constellation. A thread, a single thread that seemed to extend into infinity, nothing similar in any of the other powers. Approaching it, Izuku was more drawn by the thread that was jutting out into nowhere and everywhere. His hands reached out, fingers barely grazing the pulsing green thread of energy. The sensation he felt was nothing short of what toothpaste feels like when coming out of the tube. At least he thinks this is that. Everything in his vision blurred as he shot past. Summit, this pork is delicious. I know. My Doria-kun is missing out. Eyes wide, he was treated to a first-person POV of someone looking at Kaminari devour ribs with gusto, a smile on his face as Gyro passed behind Denki. Manners Jemmingway, manners? With something this good? Not a chance. He heard a sigh, a very familiar sigh. When you two are going to get a room? Melissa's voice somehow was inside Melissa's eyes. No, upon further inspection he was in her senses. He could feel what she could feel, see, smell, taste. It explained why he suddenly wanted pork. How he wondered, ignoring the flustered looks of Kyoka and Denki. Something must have happened when Strand first activated. Or this is one for all overall weirdness. It interacted with Void before he reasoned, remembering that day in the hospital way too clearly. Regardless, he realized he was more a passenger than in control, thank God, so Melissa couldn't hear him, which was good because this was a breach of privacy of the likes never seen before. He had to get out of her head. Reaching out for his senses, he found the Strand thread, this one divided. He could easily see the one that connected to his body, the one to Melissa, and one that led somewhere else. They seemed divided, one strand easily stronger than the other. Against all his better judgment, he reached for the weaker one again, the sensation of pure vertigo, a pull so irresistible that he could do nothing to fight it. Just go with it. Like fighting the current of a river, you'll only end up tired if you do. Just learn how to swim under it. Embrace it or be drowned by it. Are you sure this is real? Positive Shigaraki. The data we got from that warehouse months ago show it so. There is another base. Izuku recognized the first voice. Hateful, raspy, edgy. The teen with those same hateful eyes. His vision was now of that computer screen. Small hands working on a keyboard that had the words on the keys erased by sheer work and age. Lines of words flying across the screen across pictures and coordinates. His vision suddenly shifted as the owner of the eyes looked, and Izuku actually balked. The girl that stabbed him. Toga was it? Recovered already? The one with the raspy voice, Shigaraki asked. Kinda, she replied while rolling her shoulder. Got to restock on blood and read those quirks I lost in the fight. The doctor has you set up already. A special cocktail of blood ready to drink, Shigaraki stated, and Izuku heard it all. This was valuable. So, coordinates to the underwater base in Hashima, Shigaraki reminded, and Izuku did a double take. An underwater what in where? The hell? Yeah, more like an assembly line to be perfectly honest. The mobile base that they crashed on the island months ago was not only the main base, but a supply line as well, he heard a juvenile voice explain. T-dolls, Bo, those mechs. All from that underwater base. The mobile base simply didn't have the facilities to build something so massive in such a short amount of time. That's why the recall order came about. It recalled resources. That thing laid a trap. It didn't take much for Izuku to realize that the juvenile voice meant M98, that T-doll had been involved in a lot of things, and it seemed so did in the complete annihilation of everyone on the mobile base he and his classmates had been sequestered to months ago. And Izuku stiffened. Somehow the child, because of course a child working with villains, kept a cool facade despite every cell in his body telling him that the owner of the voice he just heard was a monster posing as a human, and that bled to his connection to this kid. What do you seek in this base, Gadget-kun? Information mostly. The teleporter and that goo that took over the Nomu, they must have been built there. We find data. We find ways to fight them off. That was actually a good plan. Why the villains were on the offensive. That is supposed to be the hero's job. There's the fact that the heroes are on the move. Your mole in the class said that the teachers of UA are pretty much overhauling the defenses of everything they own, Shigaraki stated, which made Izuku stop dead in his tracks. A mole. A traitor. A motherfucking rat. Okay, deep breaths, deep breaths. Learn and inform the teachers first, and flail whoever is the rat later. Indeed, that means that any strange movement will be heavily monitored. It means that any lead the heroes have on the troop will be looked at, and if one of those leads leads them to Hashima and to us during a heist, then it could spell problems. Already working on a solution for that, sensei. Shigaraki said. Izuku noted the tone of reverence and affection this Shigaraki had for this sensei, whoever this man was. Probably the mastermind behind the League of Villains. Wonderful. Keep talking, he has a lot to tell his teachers. Oh, remember those tank munitions we found alongside the tank we stole from the MLA? Excuse him, fucking what? Why do these chuds have a tank? I had Jackal currently working on a surprise using those shells. He said he will have it ready in 3 weeks. Something about proximity detonators and the like. I say we have Kurogiri drop it right on top of UA and use the distraction to move on to Hashima proper. While they try to fix their precious school and pick students' pieces, we get what we want. Scot-free, oh hell no. Ah, the old misdirection. Haven't done that in a while, sensei spoke with some fondness to the plan in question, as if reminiscing. Sounds about right, but Kurogiri will have to drop from above it, not port them directly to the grounds. They must know now we have a teleported and must have defenses for infiltrations using teleporters, Gadget said simply as if discussing the weather. Why, the kid was discussing a terrorist attack with such a cavalier attitude, what the hell? Good thing you're not teleporting people then, Toga said simply. Pity I won't be able to see Izuku-kun for a while, but I'll have to do with what we find on Hashima, no, Shigaraki said simply, making Toga blink, making Izuku blink. No. Exactly, no. I have plans for you, he said as Gadget's view shifted to something in Shigaraki's hands, something he tossed to Toga. A newspaper. The hero killer, she asked with glee. Recruiting Shigaraki-kun. No, eliminating the competition and getting Toga a new face. Elimio. I get it, Toga sounded giddy, really giddy. Indeed, we don't need the hero killer proper, just his image, delightful. Before I would have tried to recruit him, but I recognize we are too apart. He's our rival in destroying society, and I will not have him take what's ours by right, Shigaraki said simply. I'll simply use him as a premium skin to get some extra muscle. After all, he has fans willing to die for him. Yes, I like this. The old switcheroo, I like this. Tomoyaku and I am impressed. The way sensei spoke sent chills down Izuku's spine. Despite the praise, there was an underlying edge to it. So in 3 weeks, we dropped the bombs, right? Gadget casually said, and Izuku was officially freaked by this kid. Shigaraki and Toga he could understand, but a kid. Yeah, but Toga, you go to Hosu in 2 weeks from now. Duran pretty much said that's where the hero killer is headed according to his feelers, Shigaraki ordered. That's manual territory, and last I heard Native is actively hunting Stain-chan, Toga said in a somewhat giddy voice. After the shit he pulled with Magma Dragoon and that civvy, he's lucky he doesn't have more heroes hunting him. They are learning. If they want him, they have to go in groups. Going solo means death. And yet you're sending me. Stain is a hunter. What better way to hunt him down with yet another hunter? Shigaraki said simply. Cheer up, Toga-chan. If all goes according to plan, you'll have a new face that will attract Midoriya-kun. Okay, what? Really? Yes, Stain attacked his mother. Just show your transformed face and he'll come to you. In fact, that's giving me an idea. We could use something to separate him from the rest. Good old Doc wants to study him, see what makes him tick. Izuku had heard enough, and he could feel his connection to Gadget fraying and weakening. So he turned inwards, letting himself be swept back into his body, everything moving past at what he imagined was the speed of thought, the speed of light, covering the distance from where the villains were located to where he was. He could not calculate with that how far they were, which suck off not as much as suddenly getting slammed into the ground by his thoughts returning to his body after pretty much doing a high-risk infiltration of a villain's mind during a meeting and no one noticing. Only he did. Shit. Slowly standing up, Izuku rolled his shoulder, reaching for a small piece of concrete on a stand nearby. Zero's idea of a joke, considering that he consumes elements to heal and use them. He had made the mistake, he needs to consume concrete to use it. And so Zero, in his infinite trolling ways, decided to get him a snack, because with that smile all he can do is that, troll. The joke's on him because the moment he let his hand consume the concrete rock down to the atomic level and infuse it into his body, he regains his strength, and now he has an objective. Tell the teachers. They have a traitor among them, feeding the villains information. In 3 weeks they were going to attack UA to distract them while they raided a troop base and send Toga to kill Stain and wear his skin like a cheap dress, all the while they have no idea what they did, right? Well, two can play that game. Chapter end notes. So, what do you guys think? A little foreshadowing and working on my chaotic mojo now. From this point onward MHA canon is officially dead. At best I will use it as a handstand for other chapters, but don't expect a Hosu chapter with the usual suspects involved or the training camp hell. Now dog. Now this is MY show and Izuku has a hotline with a nut job for espionage. Who said heroes have to play fair? Not in this fic, now it's on. Also thinking about the new name of Izuku's new solar class. How about Soulborn? Anyway, I hope you guys liked the changes I made so far. From here on out we are on a wild ride. This is HYPN0S signing off. Have a good one everyone. Happy trails. This would be all for today, next part coming soon, so please like, share and subscribe to get informed as soon as the next part drops.